Harvey.
Here.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mrs. Burrows.
Here.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here. Will you please join me to stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So it's great to see so many people here today. I know some of you contacted me in advance that you'd like to make a public comment. Even if you didn't contact me in advance, you're still welcome to make a public comment just by raising your hand. But before we go to that section of the meeting, I want to turn the meeting over to Mr. Hunt. He's going to give us a little background on the tennis court project and the status update, and then we'll go to public comments.
So thank you and good evening. I think before jumping right there, we kind of have taken a little bit of a step back, so I'm going to take just a few minutes to discuss kind of where we've been and I think where we're at tonight. And certainly I think there'll be more dialogue as the meeting and the presentations are shared tonight. This process really began in 2013 when the superintendent and with the board at that time became very clear that we were underspending in terms of capital improvements, that we had a significant need in terms of the intermediate building, a building that was well past its useful life, and we were underspending in the area of capital improvement. The other piece of that was really understanding the priorities of the district from a capital improvement standpoint. So those two needs really kind of set two goals, was to go undertake a process that first addressed Chagrin Falls Intermediate School, and second, really developed a comprehensive plan to address our permanent improvement needs. So I think tonight, if all are in attendance for the presentations, you will see that we have a very clear understanding of our priorities, our needs, and the directions that we're going to go. So obviously, fast forward, the process to determine what option with Chagrin Falls Intermediate School took a number of years. In 2017, the bond issue passed, and after that passed, we moved on with design and construction. But with that, we also understood that planning takes time, and we need to be thoughtful about that. So we also, as that process launched off, we looked at master planning with the remainder of our building in terms of where's the direction for the next 5, 10, 15 years in terms of our building. That kicked off in the fall of 2018, so a little over a year ago. The superintendent formed a committee. It was a facility master planning committee made up of architects, construction folks, local community members, and really facilitated by Ryan Schmidt from TDA. We're engaged with TDA to lead us through that process. It's unfortunate he's not here tonight because I think the district and the community certainly owes him a debt of gratitude. So during that process, various iterations came back to the master planning committee. Feedback was given, changes were made. One of the major changes, and I will show it a bit later in the facility master planning committee, was a change to the traffic pattern at the high school. So one of the most significant issues that came out in our community meetings and conversations with staff about the high school was the ongoing issues with parent drop-offs who would pick up only one entrance and one exit to this campus. So a recommendation came out that we would change traffic patterns. I actually brought that to the Board of Education because I was concerned with the safety of kids crossing the rear of the property last spring. So my recommendation included changing the traffic pattern, investing in some paving, but to hold off on reinstalling the tennis courts at that time. With a background on that, I had been part of a traffic pattern reconstruction at another school district that was implemented that ended up being a complete catastrophe. So I didn't want to reinstall courts, put in a traffic pattern, and realize it wasn't going to work. So at that time, we communicated with parents that we were putting this on hold while we implemented the traffic pattern, that we would take the fall to make sure that the traffic pattern was effective and efficient, and also in that time look at various locations in which the courts could be reinstalled. So that work has been taking place this fall. I would report that the traffic pattern is much safer, much better, both at arrival and dismissal. I'll take a moment to commend our staff. It did displace them in the rear of the building. They certainly have a longer walk. They've been great with that piece. And ensued conversation about location of tennis courts. We evaluated a variety of areas on this campus There'll be a recommendation later on a location, but that included looking at where they were previously located, looking at over by the middle school parking lot, looking in the rear of the building on the field back there, and even looking at Gurney. So the recommendation tonight is going to be that a location will be on the east side, or I'm sorry, towards the middle school parking lot. It has shifted a little bit, but again, later there will be a visual. So the master planning committee did conclude its work, obviously, tonight. Met with capital planning, that's a separate committee. They met with finance committee, and you're getting kind of a lot of recommendations coming to you tonight. It's a lot coming at you, but I will tell you that the amount of work and time in terms of thoughtful planning is, I think, going to serve this school district and our community well into the future. You'll hear two scenarios later, both of which recommend an increase in capital spending to a figure of $2 million to meet our needs. You'll have opportunity to see some of that, what is in that recommendation. There's also, within the facility master planning, there's a variety of recommended projects. Obviously, you're not going to be able to pay for all of those at one time. And there's significant things like the renovation of a building that would require alternative funding. So there are 3 projects that will be recommended that the board consider funding in the next, I think it's labeled 1 to 5 years. The tennis courts, STEM wing at Gurney Elementary, and the third being a bus garage transportation department replacement. We can talk about those different projects later as we go through, but I think that gives you background on where we're at. So the recommendation is to fund those 3 projects. It's just a matter of kind of how does that fit with levy cycle and forecast, and all of that needs to be discussed and hashed out tonight and maybe into next meeting as well, so we can determine when those projects will be funded. So that's a lot.
It's kind of a capsule of the whole meeting in one little piece. One of the questions that I have received that you might want to address now is why the tennis courts couldn't be reinstalled while we were testing the traffic pattern. What was the need for student parking in that vicinity?
So the traffic pattern change, a large part of the issue is students crossing in the rear of the lot into the building, and really it's about timing, so when all of that arrival happened. So part of it was based upon the ability to move all of student parking in a large lot in front of the campus, which obviously prevented that from happening or being built on that premise. The other piece of that was to try to create a larger central lot for community events as well. So performing arts center, football games, things of that nature, was to put more parking near those locations so people could access them.
And the idea, as I recall, was that if all the student parking is on the north side of the campus, and students come in the front, they park, they're then walking over to the campus without other traffic, circling around in that vicinity. That was the primary driver of that decision.
That's correct.
The other question that I've gotten a lot is the bond funds that were set aside for the tennis courts and what the status is of the about $200,000 that we had earmarked for reinstalling the tennis courts, if those are still intact or not.
So I think later I don't want to steal Ashley's thunder, looking at bond proceeds, there's over $500,000 in bond proceeds still in the account. So is that $200,000 intact? I think you can make the argument that we did additional work to the building beyond the bond, and we still have over $500,000 in the bond account.
I'm sure there'll be other questions, and we're going to get to a lot of information tonight. As Bob said, this is really a culminating meeting of a lot of work that's happened in the past 12 to 18 months. So you probably know that at every regular meeting of the school board, we invite public comment. We're thrilled that you're here. We love hearing from you. At this point, I'm just going to read some guidelines because we are in a public school building and it is a public meeting that's being video recorded. Community comments are one way for citizens to communicate with the Board of Education. When you're called upon, please stand and state your name, address, and the topic. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Remember that this is a formal and official meeting of the Board of Education, and what you say becomes part of the official meeting report. If your comment involves a problem with a student, employee, or a board member, please do not address them by name. Keep in mind, we are meeting in a schoolhouse and possibly in the presence of students. I think definitely in the presence of students, I saw a few. At this time, the primary role of the Board of Education is to listen and to reflect on your comments. Sometimes board members may respond or they may ask additional questions, but not always. Regardless of whether we respond or not, your input is very valuable to us, so thank you. If any of you would like to address the board this time, if you'll raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you. And would you like to start? You can just stand and state your name.
Would you like to come and sit with us? I always feel like the standing thing is like...
I'm fine standing. I'm good standing. Sorry, thank you, but I'm good. My name is Leslie Simkowski. Should you use the address?
Yeah, just because for a record, your address and what topic you're addressing the board.
1072 Sherbrooke Drive and Cottage Place.
Okay.
My son Andrew plays on the Chagrin boys tennis team. I am here to talk about the future of the tennis courts on campus. And while I completely understand with the renovation of the intermediate school that the existing courts were unavailable for use, I am concerned about whether new courts will be located on the high school campus. If so, how many courts will be included, and when they will become available for the high school teams to use. We moved into the district 5 years ago, drawn to it because of the schools, not just for the academics, but the variety of activities that are available to the students. We were in a district that saw numerous cuts due to levies being voted down year after year. One of the programs that was cut and still has not been brought back was the boys tennis team. My son Andrew has been playing tennis from the age of 4. He loves it, and it's provided him with an avenue for much growth over the years. However, playing competitive tennis prior to high school doesn't involve a team experience. It's a very isolating sport, especially before the high school experience. My husband, who couldn't be here today because he's out of town, we both were just counting down the days until Andrew could be part of a high school team and have that team experience. And while we're thankful for the opportunity to play on the world courts, being able to play on all high school courts adds a whole other aspect to the team experience. For one, it further validates the school's support of the tennis teams. It also provides opportunities for students to easily come out and watch matches and support their peers. No extra traveling is required by any of the team members, which as a parent is a much better alternative than all the carpooling that took place last year. In addition to having a tennis team, the strong community support of Chagrin Falls also made this an attractive place to move to. When the levy came up for the intermediate school, there was no hesitation at all on our parts to vote yes. I'm a strong believer that supporting schools is not just necessary, but a personal responsibility to give back. Just as we have a responsibility to give back to the schools, Chagrin Falls School District has a responsibility to give back to its community. This support goes beyond the academic opportunities allowed for current and future students. It involves providing the community with opportunities to not only use the track, workout rooms, the football field, but also tennis courts. In Solon, they have 12 courts available at their community park for their residents. Actually for any residents, but they have 12 courts available. Twinsburg Community Rec Center houses 7 courts. Kenston High School has 8 courts available for its residents. Chagrin Falls are one of the top schools in the state of Ohio, and currently we have no usable tennis courts on campus. Moving forward, I sincerely hope that you as the board strongly consider not only installing tennis courts on campus, but also doing so sooner than later. The students on both the girls and the boys tennis teams deserve the opportunity to play on home courts. They deserve the opportunity to feel supported by their school district and their peers. And the community as a whole deserves to have access to courts where they live and continue to support the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? anybody else who'd like to speak? Yes, just state your name and address.
My name is Leslie Lozon, 1128 Royal Oak, and I am the boys tennis coach. Was the girls tennis coach for many years also. I'm kind of just dittoing what Leslie said, and I do want to add, not only does her son play tennis, but he is the Ohio State boys champion. It's incredible, it's an incredible feat that he did, and it's embarrassing to me that we don't have courts for him to play. I'm just stating that as a coach, I think the liability of them driving back and forth to Laurel is going to cause us a lawsuit someday, because they are driving and they don't take buses and they carpool and they're rushing to get there, and I just think that that could cause a problem. I think that you all know that the tennis courts is something that everybody in the community can use. I have a 93-year-old mother that lives in Hamlet, and I come to the tennis courts and hit with her in the summers. There's nothing for them now. And parents come up here and hit with their 6-year-old kids, or the parents come out here. So the tennis courts are not for just the football team or just the soccer team or the high school kids. It is for the whole community, and I certainly hope that you will look into that and consider that when that's coming. And I understand monies are an issue. I would just like you to know that I've talked to the United States Tennis Association Committee. It's USTA, and they give grants. So whoever I need to talk to give that information to, they would be willing to give us some grant money to do these. And I agree with Leslie, the sooner the better, because these boys need to feel part of a team. I mean, they are a team, but no one can come and watch them. Their friends aren't there like all the other things, and I just, with a community like Chagrin Falls, I think we're missing out. So thank you for listening to me. I'm here to do whatever I can because I truly love these boys. So, and they're wonderful, all of them.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment?
Gigi Cooper Lewis, 45 Stadium Road. And maybe later in the meeting, when you go through it more, it'll be clear. Just one thing I'm not clear on, I'm not asking a question, I'm just putting out there hope to learn more information, is I'm not clear if the money is set aside because there's going to be courts coming at some point, you just don't know where to put it, or we're now looking at, now we have to raise money for courts. I just am not sure where we stand on that, and I'm nervous about that maybe eventually that means, no, we're not going to do courts. So I thought that initially it was, there is the money set aside, but we just don't know where we're going to put it. Now I'm kind of feeling like maybe that's not even the case. So, thanks.
I think I'll go ahead and try to address that now, but I think you also get a lot of information during the meeting. The original plan was to reinstall the tennis courts where they were. And we did set aside about $220,000 in the bond proceeds to do that. The project has now changed, and it's been a few years later, and now we're at a different site, and we have different numbers, and the numbers are around $500,000 for the courts. So we are definitely grappling with where the money is going to come from. As Bob indicated, it looks like we may be fortunate enough that there's enough money within the bond proceeds. Part of what we're going to talk about tonight is within the next 5 years, all of the needs at all of our campuses. And there's not enough money to do all the projects that we need to do. And so part of our responsibility here is to talk about how we're going to finance them, if we're going to approach the community for an additional tax to help support them, when we would do that, et cetera. And a big piece of it, which you'll see in the reports tonight, is truly understanding what we need and prioritizing those needs. One of the things we'll talk about is if a project doesn't get done, does it then cost us more money because it didn't happen? There are other things like efficiencies, where if we do all of the parking lots at once, for example, we might have efficiencies of cost because we're doing a lot of that work at the same time. So there's a lot to consider for sure. I don't know if that cleared it up or muddled it more, but basically, if we were reinstalling with the original plan and it was still $200,000, I don't think we'd be having much of a meeting tonight. But because it's a different project and there's more of a cost involved, and we know we have other projects, it requires a more robust discussion about all the needs in the district.
Right, but I'm just wondering if it was and thought that they were going to be replaced, where 200,000 versus 5, that's a big difference. So if the idea was we were going to put tennis courts in, you would think the number would be there. And no, because that's all of a sudden now we have to come up with 300,000 more, you know?
So the original location was where they originally were.
Mhm.
And then it's just a matter of, you know, we had the learning village there. It's basically a matter of putting new courts down where they already were. We've heard the feedback that it's important to keep all 5 courts together for the tennis team play. And so in order to do that, we have to decide, do we put them back where they were, which would be a lower cost alternative, and we still have that money earmarked, or do we move them over to the middle school, which involves then setting a foundation for them, and so it becomes a more expensive project. But those are questions that the board is still asking. We may decide to, you know, that the right solution is to put them back where they were, and then it's $220,000, and
I don't think that number would hold there.
well, it would still probably be more than it was a few years ago. But it wouldn't necessarily be the 500 that we've been told for the other. The other thing is, well, first of all, I want to apologize because I did have conversations with people who were under the impression that a decision has been made not to reinstall the tennis courts, and that's absolutely not accurate. And I can only speak for myself as one board member. We all process things differently. But I understand the desire to put them back as soon as possible. And the board is asking questions to really understand, now that we have all this new information about what our facility needs are in the next 5 years. And some of these projects are projects where we're going to have to spend money because they're literally falling apart. When we say build a STEM wing at Gurney, that sounds more like a academic improvement. But the root of it is that what we're using for STEM right now is a portable trailer that either needs to be replaced or needs $100,000 worth of repair. So we're having these conversations about not wanting to put good money after bad money, and the prioritization of how we do things when that's smartest for the district. At the same time, you know, I live in this community, I have students in this community, I am one of you. There's more to this than the bottom line dollar decision. There is the student experience, there is the community asset to it. I've heard some new points tonight that have been very helpful. It's incredibly helpful for me to have people write letters to the board, to come to the meeting. I've also heard from a lot of people beyond tennis families that say, you know, we use those courts, it's a big part of our community experience, and all of that factors into when I sit at this table figuring out what the right thing to do is. So speaking for myself, the decision is very clear to me of whether or not we should have tennis courts on the campus. The process of how we make that happen is still, I still have questions and need to work through. So I wish I could say that we're going to have it done by, you know, whatever time frame, but I'm still trying to figure out what the smartest way for me to support it is, if that helps give more information.
Miles Park.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Miles. Go ahead, Miles, sorry.
Okay, 1065 Sherbrooke. Wasn't it the test group part of the levy that we voted for? So,
The bond issue, and those are the proceeds we were talking about, the $220,000 that is still intact.
but, so shouldn't that go ahead of like bus garage and other things? I mean, it's pretty much, is it more about timing then? I mean, we're definitely going to do the courts, but it's about timing, or is that still in the air that we might not get courts and get a little mixed now again?
Well, that's part of what tonight's meeting is about, and so I can't speak for the whole board, but I think you'll hear as we go through the discussions tonight. I can tell you, and there's copies on the table over here, the Facility Master Planning Committee, which is Mr. Hunt's planning committee, has made a recommendation to the board that there are 3 master planning projects that are recommended over the next 5 years, and one of them is the installation of the tennis courts. The other one is the transportation garage and then the STEM wing at Gurney. So that is what has bubbled up from a lot of work with that committee looking at the needs in the district. and saying, these are the 3 projects that we need to figure out how to fund in the next 5 years. And part of our job tonight is to figure out what happens when and where that money is going to come from. Because the other thing that's clear in the recommendation was that we can't just take that money out of our operating budget without seriously handicapping the district's ability to provide an education to the students. So does that help?
A little bit.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Mrs. O'Neill?
I'm Liz O'Neill, 401 Reserve Trail. And I just wanted to echo everything everybody said, that this is a community asset. Tennis is a lifetime sport. I'm still playing, I'm old. Leslie. My dad played into his 80s, so it really is a lifetime sport that in the whole community. So I do want to make sure that you all understand that. Also, if you look at the 1 to 5 year plan, if this goes to the 5 year, this child's graduating. You know, this kid's got 3 years left. So I really suggest that the sooner the better. If it's between, I'm not on the board and I know your issues, but if it's between, you know, fixing the bus garage or doing the tennis courts, you've got kids that are coming through and they'll be gone by the time you get the tennis courts finished. So I really do think that time is of the essence. And like Miles mentioned before, that it was mentioned as part of the bond issue, and all of us boots on the ground going out there to try to pass a levy, and this is a promise we make. I think people remember that, and if you're going out next year, I think they're going to remember. And then the last thing is, just as a caution, because I was looking at the report, and you've got your thoughts are putting it over here on the in the woods by the parking lot. Have you thought about, like, has that been an approved spot, and do you have runoff concerns going in this Senate? But I think that's an issue. That may be an issue that I would hate to see.
What did you say again about the woods? The runoff, you know, going down in the sunlight.
The new location still needs to be, so that all of that work needs to be done. The new location needs to be vetted. Is it really the best location? Making sure that there aren't any unintended consequences like runoff to our neighborhoods.
So let me just jump in on that. There's preliminary work that's done. I mean, the engineers, storm runoff, all those calculations, but there's soil borings, all of those things kind of remain to be done.
Is that part of that 500,000?
Yeah, it would be part of kind of an initial recommendation. You do your soil borings, engage in design. Part of the issue, I mean, the estimate within the bond issue, there were 3 projects that we recently installed courts. We took the pricing of those 3 and we landed in the middle, and that's where $220,000 came for that recommendation. Obviously, things have increased along the way, and you know we're trying to address and kind of manage that conversation as well.
Mike Carroll, 125 Lakeview Lane. My kids graduated from the school district at this point, but 2 of them participated in the tennis program. My wife Jill's here. She actually participated when she was in high school here. She grew up across the street. It was very convenient for her to walk to the tennis courts. I think even when they did the rec center, and even the Philomathian project, they talked about how important it was to be part of the community and can walk to it. As I already stated, I think a lot of these kids within the community use the courts. The rec center during summer uses the courts. People would bring up their parents, which is an awesome thing to do. It's refreshing to hear, it's good to hear that you're looking to keep it on campus here for some of those reasons. As was already expressed by Mr. Garrett, I'm concerned that some of the money that was allocated from the bond issue for this big project to rebuild it gets pushed towards another project that might seem to be more important than the tennis courts. I would articulate the tennis courts weren't even really all that great shape anyways, even all the years they did play on them. So they were neglected a very, very long time as it was, from even having parents being able to have a place to sit and watch their kids play. So I think, as you already stated, or as some of the parents already stated, having them rebuilt would be great. Having them rebuilt here, I just hope it doesn't get lost in the shuffle with some of the other projects. I'm looking forward to hear what you guys have to say about it. With our state champion here, that's something that hasn't happened in I don't know how long. And that's a great thing to brag about for our school district and for the community. Like I said, the coaches have been great, the kids my kids have played with have been great, and to support the current parents and the future parents I think is important. I just hope the board considers long and hard that the importance, I think people here express the importance of the courts for the greater community, not just the current tennis players, but people live in town and all summer long. These kids start at the rec center, they get the bug, and they play as they go all the way through. And I know that's what my kids did, I think Lewis's kids, it was great. And that's the pool, all those things, that's what builds the greater program. So I look forward to what you guys have to say and rebuilding our tennis courts sooner than later.
White, 296 North Cleveland Street. To echo what Mike said about you had 5 courts, and I don't know if the 220 was for just 3 new ones, because the other 2 weren't really that great either.
It was to update and repair the 2 that remained. And then
Okay. Just curious how that money, at now the new price that you guys have been quoted, how that's going to all, how that's itemized in regards to the courts. The other 2 things, you stressed the safety, and that was a huge issue of why the whole traffic change, that pattern change and everything. Well, in terms of our kids who had to drive, like my son was a sophomore last year, 16, and was driving these other kids, and sometimes he'd go with one kid, another time another kid. They're driving to the Butler campus, and I don't even know about the girls. I don't know who's here for the girls team, but like, I was nervous every day he was driving. Maybe I'm nervous now, but anyway, because they're going by themselves. And my son switched from lacrosse to tennis, and he had a blast. He loved it. Best decision that he made. And you know what? No friend of his, no one came to watch. No one came out to Butler at all. I don't know if kids go to US and watch the girls, but no one came. It stinks. And I know when my niece Riley White played for Chagrin, whenever that was, I could come over and it was right here. And I learned not to scream and yell used to hockey games, but I sat there, but that was so great that we had that opportunity, and I think we're missing that. So look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Is there anybody else?
Sorry, just one more quick comment. I want to thank Superintendent Hemp for emailing me back very quickly, and Darby also for getting back to me. I think it was very nice to see you guys respond very quickly. I forgot to acknowledge it before, but thank you.
You're welcome. We're happy to do that if anybody ever wants to call or just have a conversation. Sometimes it's easier to get your questions answered directly that way. Well, you've given us a lot of wonderful input. I just applaud you for coming tonight. For those of you who took time to write letters if you couldn't be here, it really does help inform our decision making. We always have tough decisions before us, as you can imagine, trying to keep the needs of the entire district in mind with being fiscally responsible and respectful of our taxpayers' investment in our schools. So I think I said to a couple of you, I wish we had somebody with a really big wallet who just said, hey, here's $3 million and go do all those projects because they're all fabulous. But that's not the world that we live in. So what we'll be going through tonight is figuring out when and how to get the money to do these projects. The only other thing I wanted to add, I think a lot of you know us on the board. I think every single one of us had children who played rec tennis and have also used the community court. So of course we respect that and know what an asset it is to the community. I was on my high school tennis team, so I think there are many of us who have a fondness for tennis and want to do what's best for the tennis team, but as well as the whole district. So with that, I think we'll move on with the meeting so we can get to the meat of the material. Please stay as long as you can, but if you need to leave, it's not a problem. You can exit by the back door. And we are video recording our meetings now, so it'll be available on our YouTube channel if you have to leave and you want to see it later. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion for the approval of the September 4th, 18th, 25th, and October 16th minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. O'Toole, seconded by Mr. Rankin.
I do want to point out on the September 18th minutes, we left off which minutes we approved with that meeting.
I know somehow that got deleted from the file, but at that meeting, we approved 8-1 and 8-14 meetings, August 1st and August 14th. That will be corrected in the final file, so approve as amended, please.
As amended. Any other discussion or comments or corrections? Mrs. Bruno, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes?
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
For board reports, this is where we share board committee updates. As I go through the list of committees, if you'll provide a summary of your last meeting and whether or not there was a meeting pending, or if there was no meeting, just say in the report. The audit committee, Mrs. O'Toole.
No report.
The board policy committee, Mrs. Rose.
No report.
The business advisory committee, Mr. Rankin.
No report.
Capital planning is me. We did finalize the facility improvement plan this month and have presented it to the board in preparation for tonight's meeting. The FIP, it's called, articulates the 5-year plan for facility maintenance and improvements in the district and recommends the 2020 capital budget and projects for board approval. The board finance and budget committee, Mr. Rankin.
Our upcoming meeting is January 13th in this room at 6 o'clock.
And records retention has no report. For board recommendations, can I have a motion for board recommendation 6A?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Rose, seconded by Mr. Kanziger. This is a recommendation to approve a performance bonus stipend to Mr. Hunt for the 2018-2019 management of the construction project and excellent performance on the state report card. The board wanted to really take time to acknowledge the extra work that was involved in managing a large construction project, and to do that while also seeing the district make great strides with the state report card is really to be commended. So we wanted to award this performance stipend in recognition of that. Any other comments? Okay. Mrs. Bruno, will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
At this point, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Hunt for the superintendent's reports.
Thank you and good evening. Before we get to the presentations that were discussed a little earlier, we have a couple of recognition presentations that we'd like to do. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. DeSenza, the middle school principal, to talk about the first recognition for our middle school achieving the 2019 OMLA Component Award for Exempted and Display Curriculum. If you're on Twitter by chance, we're going with certificates because every picture I saw in the last couple of weeks has been them getting some kind of hardware trophy, so we thought we'd hang something different on the wall. So ask Mrs. DeSenza to give kind of an overview of that, and I'd like to, after that, bring each of the teachers up and recognize their work on this effort.
Absolutely. Let me stand over here. Nearly 10,000 individuals are members of the Ohio Middle Level Association, which was founded in 1973 by a group of middle level educators. It is one of the fastest growing professional organizations in the state of Ohio. Members include people of all levels, from teachers to administrators, parents to students to college personnel and State Department officials. It is governed by an executive board and made up of elected officials and regional representatives. And they became affiliated with the National Education Middle School Association in 1975. The purpose of the Ohio Middle Level Association Component Recognition Program is to identify and recognize schools that have implemented the middle school concept components in an exemplary manner. And it is the intention of the OMLA that the recognized programs will serve as models for aspiring educators to provide model resources across the state. The award criteria included interdisciplinary units that enhance natural connections among disciplines, where team members have autonomy with their assigned students and flexible scheduling, that the integration of contents across all curriculums, and it was academically challenging, which supported all of our best practice research in the areas of technology, project-based student inquiry, and learning preferences. Lastly, the learning objectives of the curriculum are assessed in a variety of strategies. OMLA representatives did complete a site visit last spring to see this in action, and they recognized the school this year as the winner. The team was recognized recently in November at the state conference in Columbus. The 7th grade team leads an interdisciplinary curriculum. In addition to a great Greek Olympics that they hosted this fall, they have an exceptional cardboard boat regatta in the spring. It concludes their 7th grade school year, and all students participate in this final cross-curricular unit. Mr. Hunt, I know you will introduce the members of the team, but we have here in attendance Brian Johnson, our team leader, who is also a DLT member and a coach, Jessica Johnson, our ELA teacher, and a Pass Patel for Kids distinguished teacher. Janet Adamowski, an intervention specialist for English Language Arts, and our present Chagrin Falls Teacher of the Year. Courtney Polkar, gifted English Language Arts, and our speech and debate advisor. Larry Richmond, social studies, Power of the Pen advisor, member and coach. Allison Heinzman, our math teacher, DLT member, and district tech advocate. Brooke Campbell, our Spanish teacher, our Spanish club advisor, and district tech advocate. And Cindy Dean, science teacher, science buddies, and Destination Imagination advisor and DLT member. This team seeked local sponsors and built community partnerships. They created spiritware. They collected rewards. They garnered guest speakers from the City of Cleveland for the Water and Sewer Division, and also a nonprofit group called Drink Local. In English, they read novels and articles and wrote argumentative essays. In science, they did the Archimedes Principle and the foil boat experiment. In math, they learned about nets and surface area. In social studies, they studied boat styles, water, and cultural developments through history. In art, they designed their flag logo. And in world language, they discussed the water crisis in their target language. The students competed in an Iron Giraffe fundraising event, created commercials and a CrowdRise page, built a cardboard boat that was sure to float. They raised $12,000 their first year and over $15,000 last year, building almost 2 wells in South Sudan, which they learned about through reading their book, A Long Walk to Water. This team should be honored for their incredible teamwork and collaboration. Both are necessary to create, develop, and execute such a positive, problem-based, relevant unit. I know that what they gave our students and the people of South Sudan will have a long-lasting impact, and what makes this team very extraordinary is that they presented this at a state conference to other teachers in order to extend their reach. More schools, more students, and more causes are going to be impacted because of them.
So in a moment, I'm going to ask all of the teachers to come up at once. I won't embarrass you, but I did want to say, last night we had a meeting and we've been talking about these core competencies, and we're flailing with that a little bit right now. But I would tell you there's a list of 24, we narrowed to 8 at one point. Almost everything that was on that list can be tied back to what you put together in that unit. And you can't do that without just a tremendous amount of dedication and time to do it as well as you do it. And I just wanted to recognize the time and the commitment that you've put into this. It's an amazing thing for our students and our kids. And I appreciate you being exemplar and stepping up for our students. And this recognition, for the board perspective, I haven't seen a recognition at this level in my tenure, and it's certainly deserved, and we appreciate everything you've done. So at this time, if we can have the whole team step up, we're going to give you certificates and maybe let you slide out the back door.
A few of us came to the, and it was unbelievable. It's such a great project. Thank you for all the work that they do. Congratulations. Congratulations. Really, I want to participate. I don't want to get in the car and put you in a boat. I saw some of them.
The teacher's boat
What a
sank
fun event.
fast.
I love watching it. Loved it. I'll be there again. All right.
You bet. How you doing?
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could have someone step up and then get the board in there as well too, we can take one complete picture and just kind of squeeze in a little bit. There you go.
So as much as they would love to come back for another meeting, I also wanted to include this and acknowledge and recognize The middle school was selected as a school to watch in 2019 by the National Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades. And that's a national award. They develop a rubric on best practices. They're evaluated upon that rubric, and they choose and they're recognized. So this is for Mrs. DeSenza and the middle school staff.
Did you get all of them?
No, we can get it. Mr. Hunt, you get the photo? There you go. We've got everybody, if everybody just takes like a half step in, ready, 1, 2, 3, half step in, there we go, that's perfect. I've got everybody right here, 1, 2, 3, and one for good measure, big smiles, everybody, there we go. Good
He's developing a resume of photography skills.
I don't know if anyone from the staff wants to stick around, but this is the official public hearing of the district draft calendar. So we do have to provide an opportunity for the public to speak on the district calendar. Just a quick summary of what the process entails. This is not a process in isolation. We are a member of a 12-school consortium for our career technical programming, so high school programming that students may want to pursue in cosmetology, and food service, construction trades, those types of things. We are a member of a 12-school consortium. So those 12 schools first come together and kind of establish a window in which the school districts within the consortium will start. So that's where the process begins and kind of puts a post in the ground in terms of a start date. We then create 3 options per negotiated agreement. Those 3 options, 2 are created by myself, and the 3rd option is created by the CFEA president. Those options are then sent out to all of the staff to vote, and those results are brought back to me. The recommendation is option 3, and that doesn't mean it was the 3rd worst. That just means there's 3 options out there, and that's the one that was selected. I find no reason not to recommend that as the recommended option for the next school year. I'm not asking you to vote on this tonight. We do have to allow if there's any public comment on the calendar.
Are there copies for people to see, or can it be?
It's on the agenda,
Okay.
And you can access that online, and certainly if you have comments, just let me know. The second recommendation would actually come out.
The start of school is when?
August 20th. So for teachers, it's the 17th. For students, it would be the 20th. And then school concludes, the last day for the elementary would be the 26th. The last day for the high school. And students and elementary teachers would be the 27th. The last day for the high school, or middle and high school teachers would be the 28th, which is all before Memorial Day.
We don't quite have a 2-week vacation at Christmas. It's a later start date.
And there used to be, or there usually kind of like a 4-day weekend in October too.
So what's not on here and will be on here for the final reading is professional development days. So we will insert those, and I would imagine around that date will be a long weekend. That's when one of the people like to use for college visits.
I heard a tremendous amount of feedback about how positive it was, and also maybe even we want to take it a step further and make it more of an opportunity for our high school kids to go look at schools and really try and pull back on any sort of other activities that are happening that weekend. I'm just like, I know.
It's tough for sports, but certainly.
So right now, though, we don't have even the NEOEA days not
It was not
a selected day. So there might be one 3-day weekend in October.
correct.
Okay.
Again, any changes or feedback, just send to me, and we'll have a recommendation. Okay, any questions there before we move on?
I just one comment. This would entail high school graduation after everyone's out, which has happened once or twice. I know that becomes a little problematic.
In June.
Yeah.
The last thing on calendars, I would say we do have draft calendars of 21, 22. We're going to keep going with this process to get 2 years out.
All right, we're going to move into the facility planning presentations this evening. Unfortunately, Ryan Schmidt from TDA had another work commitment. He certainly has offered to come back in December if there's any additional questions or clarifications that may be needed. I think Chris and I are going to kind of split up the presentation a little bit. I want to recognize and thank him for all his work and time in putting all of this together along the way. Often I get to stand up and take credit for a lot of work that he's done behind the scenes. So Chris, very much appreciate everything you've done. The presentation is going to be split into two components, and I think it's important for everyone in attendance to know you've got two separate committees here. So the facility capital planning committee really looks at capital improvements and developing that kind of 5-year FIP, which is copies on the table. That's an ongoing committee that will meet annually and monitor and make recommendations to the Board of Education in terms of capital planning. I would tell you that this is the first time this work has come together, so we've obviously met quite a bit over the last 18 months, and I think we're in a position now where on a quarterly meeting we're evaluating progress and making whatever modifications we need to will take place. The Board of Education Committee. The Facility Master Planning Committee is one that kind of looks at the vision in the future and what needs to be done in the district from a facility perspective. We've done this now 2 times in a row. So I mentioned earlier we had a facility master plan in 2013, and we came back obviously here in 2019 to do it again. I would imagine that's probably in every 5 to 6 years. We need to kind of dial back into that work and see if it still makes sense and with all the changes that happen along the way. I don't anticipate this to be an annual ongoing committee. So without further ado, I just want to recognize a few folks. On the screen right now, these are the members of the various committees. Both the Facility Master Planning Committee, the Board Capital Planning Committee kind of came together and made recommendations that were reviewed by the Board Finance Committee as well to kind of evaluate that recommendation of whether $2 million was doable, sustainable, and things of that nature. So all of those individuals on the screen have dedicated a tremendous amount of time to the district. There's a lot of community members involved in that, and we certainly appreciate everything they've done for the school district. Also want to recognize from the master planning side of things, there were visioning sessions and a lot of staff members involved. So we brought staff out of buildings and we talked about what the strengths and limitations of their buildings were, and we had parents involved in those visioning sessions as well.
Students, right?
And students as well. So all of those people met over the course of the last 18 months to kind of create and I think we're very proud of the recommendation that's kind of coming forward to you tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's going to talk us through the FIP, and when he's done with that, I'll pick up with the facility master plan. The board has received a tremendous amount of information over the last 18 months. We're going to move rather quickly, but at any point we want to slow down or clarify something, just let us know that.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and just reiterate a little bit of what Mr. Hunt spoke about the FIP and the facility master plan. So there's really 2 components to this. One is the facility improvement plan, which is a large document. Just before you, the board's been provided, it binds all of it together. Really serves as a guide for current future capital expenditures aligned with district policies. It articulates the district's long-range master planning, which so the master plan is actually incorporated in part of the FIP. So the FNP is part of the FIP. It also identifies capital projects and current year fiscal expenditures for those budget projects, and then the next projects for the next 5 years as well too. Identifies priorities and describes rationale for those projects in quite a bit of detail. We have a document that we've all agreed on through committee called the Project Decision Matrix. That decision tree matrix really helps guide a lot of the decisions that we make. And then the FIP process articulates the ongoing maintenance plan and examines really other competing needs across the district. We have this other document called the Facility Master Plan, and Bob also alluded to that. As Mr. Hunt said, a comprehensive process. It really looks out 5 to 10 to 15 years as a district vision and where we're going with facilities. The facilities improvement plan looks at really things that are more additions to the school or renovations to the school, larger projects. And that's a process we like to do. We're planning to do every 5 to 6 years. It's a very comprehensive process. This is really the second one that I've been a part of, and it's a very important aspect for long-range planning. Again, as Mr. Hunt mentioned, TDA and the end design architecture helped us a great deal on that process.
Can I just interrupt real quick, Chris?
Yes.
We do have copies of both the facility master plan and the Fed book on the table, as well as the divisioning outcomes that were created. So I'm not sure there's a copy for everyone, but please, if you want to access that information, you can do that. Also, the board agenda, they're all linked to the board agenda as well.
The slide looks at really the 5-year facility improvement recommendations. There's really just 2 types of capital projects. Capital projects means any type of project where there's an investment. Permanent improvement is a word that we use to say ongoing repairs and updates and replacements of assets we currently have. And facility master plan really looks at additions, other projects that are larger projects as well too. There's a 2-student lens as we look through. In summary, from fiscal year 2020, this current fiscal year, to fiscal year 2024, the Board Capital Planning Committee recommended a $10 million budget over those 5 years, or about $2 million per year, for PI projects that are basic maintenance and repairs. The facility master plan projects have been identified, as we talked about earlier in the meeting, those to be funded over the next 5 years with a budget of $3.5 million, reinstallation of 5 tennis courts, renovation of the transportation facility, and the STEM art media wing at Gurney School. You can see the chart up there that articulates that. And flip to the next chart. This chart really simply looks at the PI projects themselves, not facility master plan, but PI projects over the next 5 years. You can see that $10 million figure at the end. You can also see we've incorporated busing expenditures or replacement of bus costs as part of a long-range plan to reduce the overall age of our buses too, as part of that. So it's no longer just a transfer out of general fund, but it's incorporated into PI. So that's included in that number as well too. You can see different categories there for different buildings and campuses and how that's broken down. So we can go to the next slide. Now this is a nice slide that really just shows some of the projects, the major projects that we have done since the community and the board has really made some additional investments in PI. It's really a great opportunity to be able to make some investments in the facilities across the district, and you'll see even in the last couple of years since we've increased that amount, a number of those projects, some that have included bond proceeds, but a number of them that have added, if you look around the campuses, some big impact to how we do business. So,
Chris, do you know
those are there.
how much bond proceeds were used for those projects? Do you know how much of the bond proceeds were used for those projects?
I could tell it
Like roughly like 100,000 or 50,000?
for the secure entrance at Gurney and the high school. Off the top of my head, it was over $300,000. I can't give you the exact off the top of my head how much it was, but roughly it was about $300,000.
Was that money on the plan of the bond, or was it added on? That wasn't planned, like we didn't present that to the community as we're doing this as part of the bond, right?
Well, the bond, when we presented to the community, the bond, it was to do the intermediate school and take care of other needs throughout the district, and we did mention improving security at all of the buildings.
These weren't specifically named as a project.
We didn't name any project specifically, other than CFIS.
Okay.
The other partial one is the partial proceeds of bond for the Central Campus site circulation as well. Those are the projects on that, and I'll flip to the next. Ms. Brudno is going to speak a little bit to this chart later in the meeting in the 5-year forecast, but you can kind of see how that's broken down year by year there. And then I'll go to my final slide here on planning data. Anytime you look at a district from a long-range planning perspective, you want to know a number of different aspects. One is enrollment. We did a 10-year enrollment study, so you'll see the results down this graph. Looks like a decrease of 65 students, and that's 10 years projecting out from the survey company Future Think that did this survey for us.
I'm going to pause with
the facility improvement plan because Chris covered a lot. 5 minutes there. I think one of the points I'd like to make, and you guys have all been involved in this, is certainly jump in, is there was a study that was done by the facility committee during this process that looked at what our spend should be. So if I'm sitting in the audience and I'm thinking $2 million is a lot of money, there's ways to look at, and it is a lot of money, but there's ways to look at how many square feet you have, what the condition of your facilities are, and kind of project needs. And I think depending on the formula, and Phil, you were part of that work at that time, it was between $2.5 and $3 million to maintain, and that's just maintain current condition of our facilities. And obviously, when we were transferring $500,000 in the past, we were well short of that, which led to some of these issues. And obviously, the recommendation is to try and make ourselves like ground so we don't run into a building that's completely deteriorating and we have to face that. So I wanted to give that background as well. I don't know if there's anything else the board either questions on or wants to make comments on before we move on.
No, just a little bit more. I mean, that is good context around okay, it's $2 million you're feeding into it every year, but let's say what is the body of the assets that the school has? It's what are we insured for? It's around $100 million. So you have $100 million of assets. You're spending about $2 million per year to maintain and even to make some capital improvements. So, in the context of how many assets are out there, it's like $2 million a year alone sounds like a lot, but in the context of $100 million of assets, it's required $500,000 compared to $100 million. It was clearly short. 200 or $2 million is a lot closer to what we need to be doing.
We looked at a lot of financial information about how other districts fund these projects as well, and Chagrin is an anomaly in that we didn't have a voter-approved permanent improvement revenue stream, and so whenever we were faced with a project, it becomes a trade-off of do you take it from the operating budget, and then how does that impact the program for the students. Since that time, we have moved some inside millage, so we now have a dedicated stream. It still isn't enough to get us to the $2 million, but that's one of the things the board is continuing to talk about. It would be great to have those funds set aside in a different way so that we're not constantly balancing what does it mean to the operating fund when these projects are pressing.
I'll just compliment, I think this is a great executive summary. I think the document that we provided ahead, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of all the work that was done. And then also just to share with the board and with you and Chris that Rick Maniloff, who's one of our attorneys, has publicly commented that this is one of the most robust and comprehensive processes that he's seen a school district undertake. He's encouraging his clients to use a similar type of approach with the Carnegie Mellon study about how much you should be allocating for PI. And also I think our architect at TDA has complimented that he feels we really are approaching things the right way, with the right kind of decision making and knowing what's ahead of us, planning ahead for, like a whole roof replacement is more than we could absorb in 1 year if we haven't planned ahead and set funds aside for that. So I just compliment that the process has kind of come full circle, and this is the first time we've seen the output of something that's been very new to all of us, and it's a good moment to take time to reflect on the value of the time that was invested and how that's really informed our ability to make decisions about funding. So thank you for undertaking the work, and we should all feel pretty good about what we've undertaken this year.
I'm going to transition to the master plan. I think my caution here is I'm going to present a lot of things. A lot of them can't be funded right now. So remember, we're talking vision and thinking out. And there'll be kind of two scenarios, two recommendations at the end of this in terms of more short-term projects that we can be considered for funding. But I don't want anyone in the audience to walk out of here thinking we're
doing all of this.
So I will start at Gurney. The major changes on the Gurney site, if you will, is a recommendation to renovate the building. But when you look at site work specifically, there's a recommendation to change traffic pattern at Gurney as well. So if you dropped off youngsters at Gurney, I I know we're often probably getting a phone call to the South Russell Police Department because we're well out on the road, and a lot of that has to do with the staging and ability to stage traffic for drop off and pickup. So the recommendation from a site work perspective is to increase the staging area and to move the playground in the rear of the building. So that would provide door-side access to drop off and pick up and provide more queuing space for parents so they're not floating out on Signal Road. So that's a significant change there. The renovation, did we skip one?
It also puts the playground on.
Sorry. So again, I think the major significant change here, as you can see, the main entry and queuing in front of the building rather than what we currently have, and a playground structure in the back. Also from the site perspective, we've already mentioned this, is the replacement of the current bus garage. If you look at SEI, which is the kind of the facility conditioning index, it's one of the worst, if not the worst, SEIs that we have in the district. This proposal actually provides a similar amount of space for the bus garage, but it also allows us to bring a maintenance department in there, so all of our vehicles are in the stage in the same place. If you're curious about location, I would just use this right as kind of, this is the current bus garage, and we would actually rebuild or build a new behind it, and then down on and take that.
So we could use the current one while we're building the new one and save some money on that.
The facility condition index is one that tells us where we are in the lifespan of the facility and how much money we need to put into it to maintain it versus what the replacement value is. And there's a certain tipping point, obviously, when it's no longer worth doing repairs or maintenance, and you need to start talking about replacement. And with the bus garage, we are past that tipping point.
So that's the Gurney site work. In terms of the actual building, there was actually 3 different options looked at by the facility planning committee. We included 2 of those in the addendum for that group, maybe 10 years down the road, that comes back to this and things look differently, at least they have something to start from. But looking from a financial perspective, this was the most feasible plan within kind of debt capacity and what we see in the future. Just some highlights of this. Again, you can see the site work and traffic pattern. There's a movement of the main office down by where the current preschool rooms are. Those rooms would actually be taken down. The main office would be moved down here, so it's not locked in the center of the building. Main entry would kind of move down by where the preschool is. We've mentioned there'd be an art, STEM, music, and preschool wing right here in this side of the building. This eliminates the need for the modular unit that is up for either replacement or significant repair.
How does that, are kids going to get dropped off by the main entrance?
Yes.
How is that saving any traffic distance to it?
So you've got all of this queuing area to drop off. So I mean, like when we drop off in the morning now, it's not one car stops right here. You actually queue like this whole way. So you could have students getting out, you probably have staff down here, greeting students in the morning, and then they walk down. So you have a tremendous amount more queuing. So then the core of the current building would be scheduled for complete renovation. We've talked a lot about collaborative space and trying to open that up. Where the current office and core here would be an open collaborative space, and I just kind of give you a visual of what we have over Chagrin Falls and Levies School, kind of what that could and would look like. Really just renovations and upgrades with the wing that was built in 1997 for grades 2 and 3, retention of the current gym, and upgrades to the current cafeteria. So not demolition, but interior renovations kind of throughout. The only real new construction kind of falls down around this area, and it's that addition of the STEM wing. Any questions on Gurney?
So the STEM wing would go outside where the current library is?
There's a gap between the current library and the classrooms that are down there, and it would kind of butt up right against there.
Okay.
You could build that currently within the existing structure and not have to shuffle anything around.
Correct. It just depends how far you go, right? Those current classrooms and with the office or not. But we'll talk about later, if we were to segment these projects,
The
that is
recognition.
one that could be segmented out.
I would just add, you noted to it earlier, but that is a down the road, I think a 7 to 10 year project. The one, within the 1 to 3 year timeframe would be the transportation garage as far as the Gurney campus and possibly the STEM wing, which is about $1 million project.
That's correct. 712 campus, we've talked a lot tonight earlier about the traffic pattern. I think the board is aware of that, which with the increase in the size of this parking lot to have that central lot for students and crossing, it was mentioned, if you kind of think about the old pattern, we have students that can come in a campus and park immediately. And we're not dealing with this kind of cross here in the back of the building, buses, parents, and everything else in the rear of the building. So if those of you have not seen the recommendation in terms of tennis courts, this has moved around quite a bit. We originally looked at maybe putting 5 courts, even right where the middle school parking lot was. We really believe strongly that this pattern is very effective, so we wanted to keep an opening here so the pattern can continue to run. So we did end up staggering these courts in this recommendation. When I first saw this, Chris and I had to take a walk out there. We actually see if there was enough room, because visually I didn't think there was. And there's a lot more room over here than you realize and recognize. In terms of kind of where this is, just like the bond issue numbers, these are conceptual numbers right now. We believe we've been very conservative in recommendations. Soil testing, design, all of that comes in, and we always hope that we're on the right side of an estimate. So I just want to put that out there as well.
Maybe this is where I want to jump in. Okay, I was under the impression that, the tennis courts were going to get redone after, like in, June 2019, the Learning Village would go away, and we were going to do the tennis courts. But because of the master plan work that was being done and design of, the new transportation, so last spring, we decided to hold off on the tennis courts for a year, is what was my understanding. And then we were going to implement the new traffic, see how it worked. And then this summer, put in the tennis courts. So that was my understanding. I thought the tennis courts were already in this, they were in the FIP, I think. And then I know they got moved to the master plan, which I thought it was just to study where to put them. I had no idea where or how it came up that, oh, maybe we won't do them now. I mean, I know money's tight, money's always tight, but I was not under the impression that we were not going to do the tennis courts this year. And I don't know, I'm hearing 1 to 5 years, because that's what everything is grouped at, but I was under the impression that we were doing that.
I think that's accurate. I mean, we haven't had a conversation about not doing the tennis courts, so that's
right. That's
a misconception.
My concern though is we voted on a levy, understanding that money was going to go towards tennis courts, and now the more I sit here, the more money it seems to be getting. And I'm a diehard levy supporter, but it's when the money is going towards what we are under the impression that it's going to go toward. And we moved from a district, there's no tennis, we came here so that he would have an opportunity to play on a tennis team. And it's not just about him, it's about everyone that's playing on those teams. And the plan is, I hear this, and I'm like, bus garage is going to go first. Tennis courts is moving further down the list, but that's the impression. And that's what I perceive when I hear you say that the busing garage is one of the worst states that it's been in. You think that you're going to spend the money on a tennis court over a busing garage when there's that? I mean.
So Leslie, I think you're misunderstanding my comment, because it's not about when. The prioritization, we're talking about if these 3 are the recommendations coming from the administration, how are we funding them?
Right.
Once we've decided how we're funding them, that doesn't mean we have to say bus garage gets built first and tennis courts get
But I
built.
thought the funding was already in place when we voted yes on the levy.
Yes.
So now that's where my concern is.
To put the tennis courts where they originally were,
Right.
we still have those funds earmarked. Let me finish. And we also have enough bond proceeds to put them where they are in this plan. So we're not saying we have the funds to build the tennis courts. I think that's...
Then do it. I mean, you have the money. He's gonna graduate, and again, it's not about him, it's about everyone deserves that experience.
And I don't think what Mary Kay is saying is we've never had a conversation about not doing it.
But do it now. Do it the way it was originally told to us when we voted yes on the levy.
Well, that's valuable feedback because the decision was made.
I also, I was in a district where levy fatigue. They keep coming back, and people are like, no, if you tell me you're gonna spend it one way and then you don't, I'm not gonna continue.
We,
The other thing is,
Sorry.
how am I gonna build the program if I don't have tennis courts?
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's so much information for us to absorb, but I think it's really valuable for us to go through the process of looking at it comprehensively. And it's valuable for you guys to see the tug and pull on the school board, that there are a lot of needs in the districts and projects, but we haven't made any decisions. Right now, we're just absorbing the information, and then we'll start to talk about the financing and the timing and all that.
The timing is the issue. The financing is, it doesn't even matter about, I know, this is the last thing I'll say, because I know that you guys need to get through a lot more. It's not about, it's about you guys saying that we're gonna have this levy, we need community support, and this is what you're gonna get if you vote yes. And then you going back on that.
We haven't done that though.
I know,
We are talking about how we're going to approach
But we were under the
all
impression it
things.
was getting built, these courts were getting built sooner than later, and my concern, just so you can hear, that's where it's really not sitting well with us, is that aspect of it.
I would beg your patience to hear everything and understand where the board is getting its information to make the decisions that we need to make. And we appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight and learn about all this. I'm sure you don't envy us our seats at the moment because it's often a very tough position to be in because we'd love to be able to do all of these projects because there's a huge amount of value. But I just want to reiterate that we haven't made any decisions. The tennis courts have been recommended to be reinstalled, and the next step is going to be for us to look at our budgets and figure out how we can do them. In fact, this is the proposal that makes the most sense from the master planning committee, that we're anticipating to really dig into this, and you all may have some feedback on what you see. And as we go into our December meeting, we talk about what would the tennis courts look like. It'll be valuable to have your input on that as well. So I can turn it back to Mr. Hunt to continue the presentation.
Okay, the other things that were identified are a renovation of stadium locker rooms and the visitor bleacher press box visitor concession. You'll see in terms of kind of order of priority later in the presentation on where these things fall, and I'll just remind you, these are kind of identifying the areas, kind of identifying dollars that would go there, and the challenge is, what takes priority and how do you fund it. In terms of the high school, so there was little conversation about demolishing, removing, or seeking another area for a brand new high school. It all centered around renovations. And I think what's nice about the way this is presented is you can kind of chunk out the high school and take on different pieces at a time. And certainly there's efficiency and scale, but there's reality being fun. So the recommendation from the Master Planning Committee is to obviously retain the high school and take a approach where you're renovating spaces. And I'm happy to go into those various areas, but essentially it kind of articulates almost the entire high school being renovated over a period of time based on available dollars.
Starting like 6 years from now. So,
Correct.
And a lot of these projects could be done over a summer, which is really nice if we can get a $1 to $2 million project.
Yeah. A lot of that probably, I think we talked about being able to sequence them, and that's certainly a possibility. So we've got two recommendations coming from the superintendent's master planning committee. So, and I don't have my glasses with me exactly. The first scenario is to take on 3 projects in the next 5 years, 1 to 5 years. The recommendation being tennis courts, the renovation or replacement of the transportation building, and the STEM room at Gurney. The scenario 1 also looked at debt capacity and timing, suggested a consideration of a bond issue in or around 2026. Again, that's a very fluid number, and a look at capacity, there's a lot of things that play into that. And go forward with the renovation option at Gurney, kind of taking on everything at one time. The scenario 2 is if the board decides, at that point, a bond issue is not a feasible approach, you can't approach and take all of that on. It's essentially going for a way to kind of chunk this out over time. Same recommendation in terms of priorities over the next 3 years, first 1 to 5 years in terms of the 3 projects. And then essentially it's just chunking out projects within the district over time. I should have pointed out in scenario 1 that bond issue would not only take on the Gurney renovation, but take on some of the projects at the high school. And they're all listed there in terms of how that might play out in terms of prioritization. Again, you're talking about 7 to 10 years out. A lot can change, but that's today's thinking in terms of those 2 recommendations.
And I just want to reiterate that it's important for me, the way that this is pieced out in the 1 to 5 years and the 5 to 10 years, that we continue to invest in the existing facilities until we have a voter-approved scenario to have the funding to do a larger project. I think we all agree we don't want to end up in a situation where a building has gotten to a point where we're in the situation that we were in with the intermediate school, that it's been let go to a point where we really needed to have community support, and we were backed into a corner.
We've spent a lot of time thinking through different phases and what can be done, and if we aren't going for a large renovation, what needs to be done for them to make sure it doesn't get there and when. So that thinking has been brought to the recommendations. Includes
The master plan,
recommendations
the
for the
vision.
master plan.
So I just want to underscore, both scenarios recommend the same thing in the next 5 years, that we have 3 priorities from a master planning perspective: the tennis courts, the transportation garage, and the STEM wing at Gurney. So that's a consistent message to the board.
Correct.
We're already a year behind on the tennis court.
Do you want to move on to the 5th now? Do you have the $2 million recommendation?
I'm sorry, I know you normally have comment, probably open comment at the beginning and end. The only thing I want to say, and I think we share a lot of the concerns here, is, there's a trust factor. And with the bond issue for Phil Mayton's school, with the understanding the tennis courts will be part of it, and we're putting a lot of trust this is still going to come through. If, to her point, if the bus garage is done first, or some other things are done first, the tennis courts are kept at the very end, we're going to lose trust. And, we talk about transparency in public service, as working in public service, also being an elected official, I get it, but you just got to keep the community informed. And I think that if that $200 that was originally allocated gets allocated for something else early on, given the fact tennis courts were supposed to be done a while ago, and I appreciate the fact maybe a better location might be better, I do appreciate that with the traffic flow and everything else. But in listening to this, I don't want the tennis court project to get lost, being that it was part of the original bond issue and for something else. And I think there's just, to her point, I think that if you're going to lose trust in the community, at least part of the community, when you pass a bond issue and you don't follow through in a timely fashion with a project that was part of that bond issue.
What I'm hearing Leslie say is new feedback to the board, which is the decision a year ago to wait an additional year to rebuild the tennis courts has caused concerns and frustration among the tennis parents that is just now being articulated to the board. And the administration presented that to the board as an option. And Bob spoke to this because he worked at a prior school where they had an idea about improving the driving flow and the parking flow, and they made physical changes to the facility that cost a lot of money, and then it didn't work out. And so the proposal from the administration was, let's do this in a way that doesn't cost a lot of money. It does mean holding off on rebuilding the tennis courts for a year and see if the flow changes. We have heard great feedback about all of those changes to the student experience in the driving and the parking, and we are hearing the feedback that it has been upsetting to the tennis families and that they would like to see the tennis courts reinstalled sooner rather than later. I just want you to know we hear your feedback.
And community members to tennis.
Yeah, community.
I
It's
think
not
they-
just.
No, I agree.
Yeah, the confusion though, I think, is the fact that the tennis courts are on this plan, when there should have been part of, we're not done with the intermediate school, is what I'm hearing. Why are we showing this as our plan? That's what I'm hearing as the issue.
Yes.
Why is this showing up here? Is even being considered in conjunction with the bus garage when we put on the bond to do it for the intermediate school?
Because this is just, what do we have to do from here forward? This isn't.
Right, but that's the concern, I'm saying, that that's the concern I'm hearing.
Here's, I think, why it landed there. The traffic pattern came to facility master planning. We saw a lot of merit in it, and we, with the recommendation, knew reinstallation of the courts in the current location would not make it possible. So that committee wrestled with that, and that's when I came to the board. So it landed in that committee and stayed in that committee, and in terms of location, there have been locations vetted. I mean, the recommendation is based on looking at other alternatives and impacts of those alternatives. So I feel very good about location. So it landed there, and it is in that 1 to 5 year window. We were not charged with, prioritizing and labeling those out. We had a lot of dialogue around that. I think that's, we need to make that decision.
Right.
How we funded it and when.
Right, to me, the concern that I'm hearing is the fact that we're considering this as part of a long-range plan now, but it's already been approved. Other people already voted.
I think that's fair.
Right, but I think we could,
That's what I'm hearing.
we should change the master plan. Instead of a 1 to 5 year window, we should have the 1 year window and the 1 to 5 year window, and maybe, and put that tennis on its own line in the 1 year window.
Great idea.
So that's what
I'm
we're
hearing
here
is-
to talk about.
I just wanted to share, I appreciate the superintendent's position about, I really do respect the fact that he probably tried to look at a master plan for the traffic pattern, took an opportunity, which I think is prudent. We just don't want the tennis project to get lost with this other project, the school gurney, or the bus garage gurney. And to your point, I think, separating it out, knowing that that's probably, since it was part of the original project, this should be something that should be funded, prioritized. If you're short funding because you're moving them, I get it, but that's something that the community, not just the tennis parents or past tennis parents, the community member, I think is a very important thing to keep on the table, number one.
And don't forget, you can also look for some grants that Leslie had talked about.
She had to leave, but she left her phone number.
Oh, okay.
Who can I give that to?
Okay. Thank you, Liz. We're going to move on. We really need to get through the financial piece because that's a big part of the decision of how we fund these things in the next few years. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mrs. Brood now, and she's going to walk us through what our 5-year forecast looks like, and then also where the funds are for any of these capital projects if they're available.
Okay. So I'm going to talk now about the 5-year forecast. I want to be clear, this part here is just discussion on the 5-year forecast. This is not going to, we're not going to get into facilities until this part's done. That's a separate section. So when you see some numbers here that are going to be slightly concerning to some people, I don't want anybody to panic because this does not include any changes to our current situation right now. So when talking about a 5-year forecast, it's really important to remember that this is an estimate. So this is going out 5 years. It represents what we know now. Obviously, I don't know exactly what's going to happen 5 years from now. We are more accurate in this year. We get a little less accurate next year, a little less accurate the following year, and so on. So we should expect this document to change. If it's exactly right, then
Something's wrong.
something is really wrong, and I would be telling fortunes somewhere not doing
Are we
this.
in fiscal year 2019 or 2020, right?
Currently, we are in fiscal 20.
Fiscal 20.
Yes. So our fiscal year runs July 1 through June. When I say fiscal 19, that means ending June 19. When I say fiscal 20, it means ending June 20. So as we all know, school finances change constantly. One stroke of a pen down in Columbus changes our entire forecast. So should something happen that changes this significantly, should we make decisions that need to change the forecast significantly, we can always resubmit this to the state. We're required to submit it in November, and then we are required to update it and submit it again in May. We are allowed to submit it at any point in time in between there. I could submit it every week if I wanted. I don't know that ODE would appreciate me, but we could do that if we needed to. One thing I want to point out, you do all have in front of you a copy of the actual report. So that is this 22-page document. The very last page is the actual forecast. The first 20 pages are the assumptions. So it's really important when you're looking at these numbers to understand that we make a lot of assumptions in these numbers to come to estimates. Typically what we use for assumptions, we use history to guide our future. So it's really important that if you're looking at these numbers and you really want to understand them, you do need to read some of these assumptions. So that's if you want to look at all of the detail. For the people who don't, which I understand is probably 95% of the people in the room, what I want you to see is this. This is a summary. Includes beginning balance, total revenue, total expenditures. What I really want you to understand is that fourth line down there where you see all the red, that's our annual surplus, or as it is currently, deficit. What that means is we are spending more than we are bringing in, starting right now in fiscal 20. As the years go by, obviously expenditures increase as everyone's expenditures increase year after year with inflation and so on. And our revenue is not increasing. So obviously our deficit each year gets larger. So that ending cash balance, there's the third line up, that's our actual cash. So if we do nothing, if we change nothing, we don't pass any additional millage, we don't increase our revenue or reduce our expenditures in any manner, by the end of 24, we would be negative $1.3 million in cash. Obviously, we can't do that. We're not the federal government, we can't spend money we don't have. Something has to change between now and 2024, be that increasing revenue, reducing expenditures, or some combination thereof. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each individual line of the forecast. So if you want to follow through the report, fantastic. If you don't, that's fine. If you want to zone out, I get it. The last slide was the most important. That's the really big picture. Now I'm going to go into the details. So starting with revenue, what I'd like to point out here, and I like to present these pie charts just to show how reliant we are on our taxes. So I know there's a sort of a misunderstanding in the state of Ohio that our schools are funded by the state. Our schools certainly are not. Some schools in the state of Ohio are. We receive there, that purple portion of the pie there is our state funding. So that's our state foundation money. And then that teal, kind of lighter blue color is our property tax allocation. That also comes from the state. Those are the reimbursements of the homestead and rollback items that get removed from the taxes and get reimbursed by the state. So you can see the large orange portion is what we rely on from our taxpayers, and then the red there as well, that's property taxes from the public utilities as well. So really just like to point that out. I think it really bears repeating because there is an understanding among some people in the state of Ohio that our schools are funded by the state, and they are not. This is another picture just to kind of reiterate the same idea. Combining those two portions of the items that come from the state, our state foundation, and the reimbursements, if you took every dollar that we received, about 15 cents out of that dollar came from the state. The rest of it, the other 85 cents, are coming from local sources and other funding. So again, our reliance on our taxpayers is significant. So starting with line 1.01, I'm going to go down through each line item on the actual forecast. Line 1.01 is our property tax revenue. So what I want to point out here is this is determined by our effective tax rate times our valuation times our collection rate. So I underline effective there because I think it's really important for people to understand that our effective rate is not necessarily the voted rate. So House Bill 920 ensures that every time we pass a levy, that levy is passed at a certain dollar amount. So then 10 years down the road, when valuations have gone up, people think that because their valuation has gone up, that we're collecting more taxes on that same levy. We are not. House Bill 920 says 10 years down the road, you are still collecting the same dollar amount. So what we'll do, now that your valuation is higher at the county level, they reduce so they reduce that tax rate. So when you look at your tax bill, for example, you'll see a line on your tax bill that says HB 920 credit. What that is that's where they have reduced the millage so that we still receive the same dollar amount. Obviously, dollars today do not have the same value as they do 30 years from now, and levies that we passed 30 years ago don't give us the same value. So they'll give us the same dollar amount, but that does not buy as much as it did when we passed that levy. So that is why schools are in this constant cycle. And I heard the term levy fatigue earlier, and that's a situation that the state has imposed on us. It's just the way our schools are funded. It's the way the House Bill 920 just continues to reduce the millage so that the dollar amount stays the same. Even though inflation goes up, our expenses continue to go up. So that's why schools, not just us, every school, has to continue to go back to the voters and request additional millage. So I just think that's really important. The other thing to note is the collection rate is important. We don't necessarily collect every penny of taxes that we levy. You can see then sometimes, for example, if you look at that first row there in 2018, our collection was over 100%, and that was because people were catching up. There were delinquencies in the prior years. They caught up with those, and so it creates a situation where in 1 year we might collect more than 100%, other years we may collect less. So it's not always exactly what we levy.
And you're projecting what the collection rate will be.
Absolutely. So given our history, that last column there, those are projections on what I think we're going to collect. Obviously, again, I don't have a crystal ball.
I worked 10 years before that. I was on audit committee many years. That's our typical rate. We collect very close to 100%.
Also, I'm projecting valuation. So that first column there, our valuations. We have updates, triennial updates every 3 years. People's property values will increase or potentially decrease, but not in our district today, luckily. But people go to the Board of Revisions. They request changes. Somebody sells a property for way more than it was listed. That will change. Those types of things are all in that valuation there. So I'm, again, estimating. So beyond 18, so from 19 on, those are all estimates. Those are not actual numbers. And again, that's based on history. If the economy were to tank and something were to change, certainly my valuations would probably be really off. We do our best.
So each line, I'm going to show you a picture of what it looks like. The gray is actual, that's history, and orange is projections. So property tax revenue, we do expect to stay pretty consistent. Our valuations are very strong in our district. When new construction comes on, that actually does increase. So House Bill 920 doesn't apply to new construction. So it actually will increase our tax revenue. It's just inflation where we don't, when we get increases for inflation, we do not get increases in tax revenue, but new construction we do. So that is why.
Of which we don't have.
Not a ton, no.
There's no available land.
Not a ton. But some of those little things there are playing into why that number is slightly increasing. Next line is the public utility. You can see there the orange portion. On each line, I've pulled out the item that we're talking about. So that small orange slice there is what we're talking about here. This is the public utility personal property. House Bill 920 does not apply here. This is our full voted tax rate we do get on that property. You can see the valuation is expected to increase. That is consistent with the last several years. And across the state, these valuations are continuing to increase. Here is where this chart is giving you the same information that it was on the line 1.01 on the property taxes there. But here you can really see where you moved the 1.5 mils, because the only thing that's changing here is that. So House Bill 920 isn't affecting our millage rate. So our millage rate is staying the full voted rate, except in 19 it is going down that 1.5 that you moved over to PI. So you can see it really clearly here. In the other slide you couldn't see it there because of all the other things that are changing the millage, but here that is the only thing that's changing the millage. That makes sense. I feel like I'm getting some puzzling.
Yeah, you lost me. Because
Okay.
I don't understand, why would public utility be paying inside mills? Why is there a reduction in the voted rate?
Because you moved it from the general fund, so their rate's not reduced, but the revenue going into the general fund is reduced.
Okay.
So they're still paying those taxes?
The voted rate is what's going into the general fund, and then the 1.5 is going into the PI fund.
The inside mills is before we had it all going to general. You moved 1.5 over to the PI.
Right.
So that's
Not
why.
just from residential, it moves it from residential and.
Right.
Right. So if this was a report on all of our funds together, you would see no change.
Yeah, right.
But because this is general fund
There would be
only,
a parallel chart if you were showing us the rate for PI funds.
the PI would increase by
and it would
1.5,
be-
absolutely.
I gotcha.
And I just flip back to the general property tax revenue. So we do see like a bump down there in 19. Is that because that 1.5 is in there as well?
Partially, yes. Part of it is because of the 1.5, and then you also have other items in there. So it's going to be mixed in with it didn't go down as much. It went down by the 1.5 for the inside, and then your voted mills went down because your property values went up. So as your values go up, your millage goes down.
So just point out that.
Okay,
So,
those,
yeah.
so those out years 2020, 1, 2, 3, that is all of the like values
Yes.
increasing as a
Right.
corresponding decrease in the bill.
Yes, and you can see that large decrease in 18. You had a reevaluation there.
21. Last one at least.
So and
just
because
to underscore, we're still collecting that money.
Absolutely.
It's just we earmarked it for
It's going into the
facility
PI.
projects,
Yes.
because we obviously need money for
Yes.
facility projects.
And I lost my train of thought. I had another point on that, but
Sorry.
I'll come back to it. That's okay. Not at all. Okay. Trying to operate two things here. So on the public utility personal property, because the millage does not get reduced here, except for when we moved it, because property values are increasing in this line, our revenue is going to continue to increase slightly. We expect. Moving on to unrestricted grants and aid, this is money coming from the state foundation. This is money that is unrestricted from the state, so it goes into our general fund and we use it to educate our children. You'll see it in a minute, there's another line where they do restrict some of the funds that they give us for specific items. That variance there from 19 to 20 is actually a mistake. That was on me. The previous treasurer would get some of this money in. She would maintain it in the general fund, and then at the end of the fiscal year, she would make an adjustment and move it out to the fund where it belonged. I was not aware of that, so I did not make that adjustment. Started in June, just didn't see it. So when I started putting some of this together, started analyzing some things, I kind of, freaked out what is happening here, realized that's why. So if you average those two, 19 and 20 together, it'll be closer to that 21 and on. So the 20 is a dip because not only was 19 overstated, but now I have to pull it out of the general fund, so there's going to be an expense this year to move it over to the correct fund.
Do you have any predictions how the state's going to give us more or less money?
If I did. So right now, the current biennium is this year and next year, so through 21. What they have said for that budget is they kind of just completely did away with formula and said, whatever you received last year is what we're going to give you. So actually, forecasting this year on this line was really easy. So I have kept that flat throughout the rest of the forecast. Honestly, couldn't tell you. The Patterson it kind of puntered out a little, and then it started getting a little more traction again. They are not giving up. They are working on it. I don't see that changing our funding in Chagrin a ton anyway. Who knows? If they were to get rid of the guarantee, because we are on the guarantee, if they were to get rid of the guarantee, certainly our funding would decrease. I don't see any situation where our state funding increases anywhere. The wellness funding, there was a lot of talk about that. Everybody got all excited about it. We are receiving that. We've received the first payment. That is not reflected in here. The state has told us that it does not go in the general fund. It goes in a state grant fund. So we do have that. We have half of it. We received the first payment. We'll receive the rest of it. Whether or not that stays in the next biennium, who knows?
Right. And the total, it's intended to help the district spearhead new projects for mental health and wellness initiatives. So it's not really going to help us offset.
In true state of Ohio form, they give you money for 2 years and then expect you to, now you figure out how to fund it. I mean, that's just how they do things. So I wouldn't get too excited about that one. Okay, moving on to line 1.04, restricted grants and aid. So in this line, this still comes from the state, it still comes from the foundation, and you can see that very tiny little sliver. This is not a lot of money that we're talking here. They do restrict some funding. Ours, what we are getting in this line is mainly catastrophic aid. What that is in certain special education situations where we spend over a certain dollar amount, we can request back to the state for reimbursement on any amount over and above a threshold that they set. The problem with this, the reason this is kind of hard to predict, even if we could predict everything that we're going to spend on our students for the next 5 years, this is dependent on what the entire state spends on some of these catastrophic situations, because the state sets aside $1 amount and says, here's what we have. Now, you guys all tell us what you need. So say they set aside, very round, very small number, say they set aside 10 million. And across the state, we all requested 20. Then we would each get half of what we requested. So it really just depends on, as hard as it is to predict for our own students, we certainly can't predict for the entire state. So, I do expect that to stay fairly consistent, but again, if that's somewhere where the state decides to cut, it could go down. Next line, 1.05 is property tax allocation. This is very steady. This is the homestead and rollback reimbursements from the state. New levies, as you know, we don't get rollback on those, so that's just money that's gone, but the money that we are receiving from the state right now is consistent. And we expect it to remain so. Line 1.06, you can see that's a small portion of our revenue there. This one is kind of hard to predict. It's kind of sporadic because it's where in a forecast, the state decides on these lines and decides on these categories for us. So those first 5 categories are the ones that they have set aside, and then they say, okay, we lump everything else in here. So for us, what this includes is earnings, income, tuition, fees, rentals, donations, kind of just everything else goes in here. You see it going down there. The reason for that is most of this money for us, not most of it, but a significant portion of it, is our interest earnings. So as we are predicting our cash balance to continue to decline, we are predicting that our investment income obviously is going to continue to decline. So that's why you see that going down there. All right, so moving on to expenditures. So just like we show for the revenue, and I think it's important to note where most of our money is coming from, I think it's also important to show where we are spending our money. In a school, we educate children. That's what we do. We don't build things. We don't create products. We educate children, and we do that with our people. So it makes sense that the majority of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. That is what they should be. If you looked across all of the districts in the state, all 600 and what do we have, 12 districts across the state of Ohio, you will see a pie chart that looks similar to this. There are going to be obviously some variances, but salaries and benefits, by and large, every district in the state of Ohio, that is the majority of your expenditures. So this is not something to be concerned with, but I think it's important to understand when we do start talking about asking administration and asking staff to tighten belts, there are really only small portions of that pie that we can affect without affecting staff and directly in the classroom.
And also, if in the instance of a failed levy, we're really forced to look at it absolutely this as well.
Yeah, if we really want to affect change and really reduce expenditures, it's... Okay, so starting with the very first line there, line 3.01, this is our personnel services. This is salaries and wages. This is our people. You can see that very large portion of the pie there. This is, like I just covered, this is the majority of our expenditures, as it should be. So we do have increases built into this forecast. We have negotiated agreements in place. And then beyond that, I have used history to kind of predict where we're going to go with raises. So there are increases built in here based on history. Obviously, there are items in here, and like I said at the beginning of this, we have to make assumptions. So beyond our current negotiated agreements, these are assumptions. I do not know what's going to happen. Certainly, we haven't negotiated anything. We don't know what's going to happen. But to come up with some sort of estimate, we do have to make assumptions.
Actually, remind me when the current agreements go through.
We are in year 2 of 3.
Except,
Except, yes, then there's an additional year.
So, yeah, so one, we have a little more now. So no real changes to number of staff members, so. As we look at where our enrollment goes, and we know enrollment is declining, but it's not declining in a manner that, if we reduce, like, you can't get rid of.
They're not all in the same grade.
Right. You have,
right. They're not all in the same grade. So at the rate that we're declining right now, I don't have anything built in here for reducing staff. If we needed to make that decision, certainly that would change the way this line looks.
And no increases in staff for this.
I have not built anything in. What I have built in is part of the software that I use to do this allows me to estimate, okay, I'm going to expect so many retirements each year, and then we're going to bring in, lower, essentially lower paid teachers. So it does take that into account. But again, those are all based on assumptions and estimates and, kind of what we think is going to happen. So.
But I think it's good to underscore that there's no plan in place right now to have changes in staffing levels. We feel pretty good about where we're at. We obviously reassess constantly and
absolutely
move people if, the enrollment's higher at the high school but lower at Gurney, so maybe more staffing at the high school.
Right, and that, that's one of those things that in predicting future, especially 5 years out,
right.
We have to make assumptions. We have to calculate something. And that's what we do. All right, so moving on to employee benefits. Again, this is one that's really hard to predict. It is a significant portion of our expenditures. Things change in the medical insurance world. Part of it, we know, the required retirement contribution, the 14% that we are required by law to contribute, the workers' compensation that's there, Medicare, those are just straight percentages that I can apply. That part's simple. Unemployment, again, that one's a very small portion of this, but and then the health-related insurances, that's where the tough part comes in on this line. We do expect increases. We've been lucky. You can see from 18 to 19 it went down, and that was in large part due to changes that the board and administration had the foresight to make. It also had to do with our staff changing behavior and really being responsible consumers. So, that's great. Going forward, industry standard, 10 to 12% increase each year. I do not have that. I have it a little bit lower than that just because we have been lucky. We've done the right things, and I think the changes that were made, I think are going to kind of help us keep it under control. But if we have a really bad year and our claims are really high, we could come back with something. Right now, we did just approve our next through December of next year. And that was at a 0, which is fantastic. That is in here.
0% rate increase.
But beyond that, it's really this one is really one where you have to make some really large assumptions and just guess.
And I want to respect what you're saying. There's a lot of unknowns in the field of healthcare, but there's been some really thoughtful approaches enacted by the board. So more than luck, and our staff, like you said, adopting these practices. So we changed the plan. Our staff is better informed. They're making really intelligent and informed decisions about their health care, and that's helping us control the costs. But even with all of that in place, there's still a lot of unknowns that can cause healthcare to be very expensive. So thank you for presenting that.
Just a question. So you said that we just negotiated, so we got like 0% through, so that'd be like fiscal year 21, 22.
That's on a calendar year.
It's right. So we were on a fiscal year that began in October. We have changed that so that our fiscal year for health insurance will be on a calendar year basis. So right now, the 0% goes through December of 20. So starting in the following January, we'll have another plan. Or not another plan, but another renewal.
Premiums, right?
Possibly, most likely, some sort of increase. I wouldn't expect 2 years in a row of 0 would be wonderful, but that's a little too optimistic for me when we're talking dollars.
So I understand. I guess this one I'm trying to understand is
So
2020
it's in 20 and 21 here.
So this is not a really great representation of it, but if you look at the difference between 20 to 21 versus 21 to 22, 21 to 22 is a larger increase. We do expect increases because of these other things. So as our salaries continue to increase, our retirement contribution has to continue to increase. So we do expect it to continue to increase in this line. It does take into consideration, however, that our health insurance, which is just a portion of this line, is 0.
I get that. I'm just trying to understand the 9% in 2020.
That is, so you went down to 19. And 20 is, we had that one-time payment to all of the staff members
Okay.
as part of the negotiated agreement and part of getting the changes in play. So there was an agreement made with them that if we make these changes, you will get a payment.
So that's what's correct in 2020.
Yes. Yeah, it was an investment to have future savings. So moving on to line 3.03, this is purchase services. What this, I don't like the way this is titled. I wish the state would come up with something better because it's not necessarily that we are purchasing services. It's not that we're deciding to go out and just hire somebody else to do something. In some cases it is, you know, but things like tuition for special programs, excess costs for special education, those types of things, we don't necessarily have control over. So when we do start talking about what we have control over in expenditures, when you look at purchase services, it's a decent sized portion of that pie there. A large portion of this piece, we have no control over. Things that are coming straight out of our state foundation. It's an expense, I give the report, here we took your money, and then I have to expense it. So we can affect this line to an extent, but a lot of this is really out of our control. So legal expenditures, obviously, you know, we do have some control over. Property and insurance liability, I mean, you know, we don't have a ton of control over that. Utilities, we have to keep the lights on, things like that. Travel expenditures we can control, but all of those deductions from the state, you know, those are kind of imposed on us. It's not us going out and spending money. And then our Sodexo facilities management is in this line. So we expect that to stay fairly consistent, slightly increase as inflation and things go throughout the...
When we bring in a consultant to help us with something, that goes in purchase services?
And legal services.
Legal
This
services.
is one I think I'd love to see flushed out in a future report, so you kind of get a sense of how much of it is required by the state, how much of it's at our discretion. And also like a trend.
Myself there. Is that me?
I think I just hit the microphone with my finger.
Okay, so moving on to line 3.04. This is a small portion of our expenditures. This is really where we can affect the number. Unfortunately, it's a very small portion. This is, however, where we purchase textbooks. This is all of our supplies that we're purchasing for lessons in the classroom. This is general supplies, just paper and pens. This is maintenance and custodial supplies, which, you know, as we've discussed, these are large facilities. Sometimes that can be more than you would expect. And then bus fuel and tires goes in here as well. So we can affect items in here, but again, some of this is, you know, these are essentials. This is not something where we can really cut a lot of expenditures here.
What's been driving the continued increase from 2017 to 2018 primarily? Or is it one thing or multiple?
I don't know that I can answer that. Sitting here today, I can certainly look into it. I would expect, you know, as fuel costs rise, and then, you know, a portion of that, you're going to have to expect this to continue to go up each year just with inflation. And then I don't know what has happened with textbooks and, you know, electronic media. I think switching some of those items over, I think, has resulted for everybody in some expenditures being a little bit higher than what they would have been if we just continued with textbooks. Sometimes we're kind of getting rid of some textbooks and replacing things with newer, you know, more electronic formats. Again, that's me saying maybe.
Right. No, I think it's another.
I would have to actually look at the details to see if I'm right.
A bit more.
And it's a $200,000 variance, so it looks like a lot, but it's not really
Although when you're trying to find savings.
I understand, right, and it makes sense, like if maybe there was a dip, but would we potentially have something go back down, and so it's worth it.
It also could be, these lines are a product of how my department codes items. It could have been something that from 16 to 17 maybe moved, see that there was that decrease from 16 to 17, maybe something that in 16 they coded as a supply,
Right.
in 17 maybe they coded as a service.
And it could have been things with the construction project, things that got coded to the construction project, otherwise may have not. We didn't have the intermediate building, and the learning village might have been, the supplies might have been less expensive. I mean, so it's worth a look at.
I'll tell you, two of the drivers here is you had math and ELA as adoptions the last 2 years. Both of those are very expensive adoptions.
Moving on to line 3.05, capital outlay. This is items that we are purchasing out of the general fund for equipment, computers, furniture, vehicles, not buses, but other district vehicles. You can see that is a very, very small portion of our expenditures. We do expect it to go down for this year based from last year. Part of that is, I believe we were purchasing
It's the buses.
buses out of the general fund that we are now moving.
Don't get excited.
Yeah, I know. We're
Just
now
got
moving.
moved.
Yeah. So, and this 2020 number is consistent with the current budgets that the buildings have. Line 4.3, just as they do with the revenue, they do the same thing with the expenditures and just give us kind of a catch-all. This one's hard to predict. I do expect it to stay fairly consistent. Again, though, you can see even a very large swing. You can see that it's a very small portion of our expenditures here. Line 5.04 is other financing uses. What's in here right now is operating transfers out and advances out. I will show you some detail here in a second on the transfers out. The advances out for 19 were at the end of the year, we had some negative balances in federal grant funds. And that is, not a product of us overspending, it's a product of just the way the federal grant funds work. You spend, then they give you money. So over that year end, if you have a negative balance, you need to advance out of your general fund to cover it so that you don't have a negative balance, which doesn't make sense to me at all, but that's what they require you to do. So that's why there was a larger advance in 19. And then those transfers. So a product of what we have been talking about a lot tonight is the recommendation that $2 million go into the PI. So that first table there shows how we're coming to that transfer amount. So we're taking the $2 million needed according to the committee, and because you move the 1.5 inside millage, that's the estimated tax revenue that you're going to get from that millage, and then the difference is what we are expecting to transfer out of the general fund. In addition to that, the second table there are all the other little transfers that we make annually to some of these programs that do not bring revenue in, and the board has seen value in funding those projects. And that's where the total transfer comes from. So all of those lines create this. So this is a summary. The gray is total revenue, orange is total expenditures. You can see our total expenditures are increasing throughout the life of the forecast. Revenue, not so much. So that green line there, that is our cash balance. That yellow line, what I included there is that's our cash balance policy. So it is slightly increasing as our expenditures for that year increase. So our policy is 2 months of operating expenses. So just to kind of give you a frame of reference where we are with our cash balance, by '22, we, according to our policy, would be needing to take some action and do something. And then obviously by '24, we have to do something before we dip there into the negative. Not possible for us.
And if we wait too long, the voting millage ends up being much higher to sustain a longer cycle. So we tend to not wait for that year when the line is crossed, but anticipate it a year or two prior to that.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to consider cash flow as well, because when we're talking tax revenue, it's not a steady flow of revenue. You know, we get that twice a year and that's it. So our revenue and our taxes goes way up, so our cash balance is really high, and then we spend it down, and then we get taxes again, and then we continue to spend it down.
And when we voted new money, it doesn't collect till the next January, so you only collect a half in a fiscal year.
Right. So when you pass a levy in a calendar year, the following fiscal year, you will get half of it, and then the year after that, you'll get the full collection on that levy.
We have to be forward thinking, which is what tonight's all about.
Absolutely. Any questions from the board?
You know us, we don't stop and wait to the end. We just ask our questions along the way.
Well, and you know, this slide is more for the community. This is my contact information if anyone has any questions, comments, or requests for records, or would really like to sit down and go through these numbers. I have never had that request, but I would be more than willing to sit down and explain it, because it's, my spreadsheets are really kind of cool.
Chris, would you mind just showing that slide up and home so anybody who's watching this knows how to contact Mrs. Bruno? Thank you. Okay, the next part of your report, I think, is how do we handle that diminishing cash balance?
Yes. So what I have provided to you, I did send out a request to the board members asking for scenarios, if there are specific scenarios that you wanted to run. I do have a spreadsheet if what I've run here is not enough. If there's, you know, well, what about if we did this and added this? I do have it available, so we can certainly just plug numbers in and jump in. But the first page, I'm looking at these little kind of colored spreadsheets here. These are all the different scenarios. So the way this is divided up.
Do we have them in front of us? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
you do.
Thank you. Okay.
So the top portion there that you'll look at is the general fund, and then the bottom portion is, rather than creating a bucket for the PI fund, which is the 003, and a bucket for the building fund, which is the 004, and the potential capital projects fund, which would be the 070, I kind of grouped all of that together just to kind of facilitate us saying, how are we going to do what we want to do?
Right.
So that's all in there. So the way this, the way I have this set up is we can pop millage in for a specific year, see what that's going to do to the general fund, or if it were a PI levy, what it would do to the PI. The very first one, labeled A at the top there, is where we stand today. It's doing nothing. So general fund, you'll see, is that negative 1.3, which is what I just presented on the 5-year forecast. And then the bottom portion on the PI funds, I'm just going to say PI for this discussion, but know that it encompasses all of those. The PI, if you look at that very first line there, the estimated beginning of available, that's approximately 815 right now. So what that is a product of is the approximately $500,000 left in the building, and then 315 available in PI.
We didn't spend last summer.
Right.
Okay.
So that's where I'm getting that 815. You're not gonna, if you ask me to run a report tomorrow, I'm not gonna, you know, run a report out of my system that's gonna show exactly $815,000. It's a combination of all of those items. That's what we have available right now for our projects.
So,
Regarding the bond, is it completely closed out now?
It is not completely closed out, but I did have a conversation with Carrie and Michelle today from Gilbane.
We have one pay app right now that they are reviewing for, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, 670 something, I believe. And then we have what they are estimating right now. And understand that reconciling all of this is a ton of work for them.
Yeah.
So, you know, I did ask them for this, you know, a few weeks ago when we first kind of started thinking about this. And they're not ignoring us, it's just a ton of work. It's not just them pulling a number out of a system and saying, here you go.
So what I want to get a sense of, not just to interrupt you, sorry, is can we be pretty assured of the 500 and it might be a little more?
Yes.
Or is the 500 still kind of a guess?
I am confident that it's
Pretty
at least
comfortable.
500.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great information.
I'm very conservative.
Mhm.
What she's telling me right now we have $1.5 million encumbered to them. That's in encumbrances. Taking those encumbrances out, we have 96,000 cash. Assuming that we're using the 96,000 for items that Chris has going on over there still and kind of, you know, things that still need to get done. Assuming the 1.5 that's all to get Gilbane, minus the 670, minus an approximate 300, and I don't believe it will be over 300. I think they're conservative as well when they tell me 300. That leaves us with, you know, 500 and something, some change, on our Gilbane purchase orders, that once we close those out, we'll free up that money to use. Right now, I can't cancel the POs because it's still going on, but we will. And I trust Carrie and Michelle that they are conservative. So when I say it's, you know, 500,000, it's probably, you can count on 500.
Okay, good. Thank you for doing that work. That helps us a lot tonight as we're grappling with all of these hard choices.
Yeah.
To know there was a little extra money. And it shows that we were underspent on the project. Good job.
Absolutely.
So A is our base case.
So A is do nothing. That's just
Right.
where you're starting.
So could you just walk us through the expenditure section of the PI? I know that we still have to vote on capital projects per year, but what is our base case assumption?
So what I took in here, and I can, again, this is all, I have it on a spreadsheet if you want to move things from year to year. The first line there, the FIP projects, those are taken straight out of what Chris presented tonight. The FIP backlog, same thing, taken straight out of there. If you total those, it will equal the 10 million and
A little bit over 10 million,
yeah,
right.
it'll equal exactly what you did. Then I have the FMP projects, the bus garage, and then the tennis courts. And I do not have,
Right.
I do not have the gurney stem wing in here. But the way when I was looking at these is every time I ran a different scenario, I looked to the end result. I looked at the end of year 2024 because we can move things from year to year. We can always advance from the and then move it back if we needed to. So really what I really kind of want to look at, total funding, how can we do it, is the ending balance, and then we can move things around in here as needed.
So I want to underscore, because we've had some discussion about all of these different projects and whether it's a master planning project or a PI project. And in essence, it all comes from the same bucket of money. You know, we have funds that we put aside for facility projects. They might be regular roof replacements or HVAC replacements, or they might be a master planning. But this, we put it all in one place, and then we try to figure out how does it impact our ending balance, or how does it impact the next levy that we might have to undertake.
Right.
And
So
then for the purposes of the audience, she has the tennis courts next summer, and then saving money over the following 2 years to do the bus garage. So the bus garage would have to wait 2 or 3 years, right?
Correct.
It would be the third summer from now.
It would be,
Second,
well, the way I've
For 2020,
yeah, the
it's
way I've
actually
presented it.
June 30th, so that's this.
So this is June 30th of this
The
summer, and then
way-
2 more summers before.
Yeah, the way I presented it, and for capital projects, it's kind of hard too, because, you know, when I talk fiscal year, which ends June 30th. When Chris talks, you know, a summer starts in June and ends
Right.
in August. That spans 2 fiscal years for me.
So, sometimes when Chris and I sit down and talk, we kind of have to like get on the same page about, well, what are you talking about here?
So it would be the summer of '22 that the bus garage would be constructed if we saved money according to this schedule.
Well, the way I have it in here, I have that we're paying for half of it in '21 and half of it in '22.
So it would be
Because-
paid for by June 30th, 2022. So that's soon. I think that's sooner than you think.
Right, and we
No,
would,
that's what I just
Okay.
said. By summer of '22, we would
It would be
have the money to
constructed
do
and
the
paid for.
construction.
It would be constructed and paid for.
Right.
well, we wouldn't. This is zero. This is doing nothing. So if you look at the bottom there, it's a big negative number.
Right.
So doing nothing, you cannot do anything.
We don't have the money to do
No.
that, but the plan would be put the money aside in '21 and in '22, and the construction would probably happen that summer of '22.
Yes. Yeah, this is showing the expenditure. if
And
it
then the
happens.
question is how to not end up with a negative.
Right, so that blue line at the bottom is what I
We
want you
can't
to
do that with
look
more
at.
help than what we have right now.
Yes. That would end up with negative, doing nothing. So, what, the next several scenarios are scenarios that I was requested to prepare. So, starting with B.
Can I ask you a question before you go
Absolutely.
into that? I would be interested to see, maybe you can pull this one up. If we just did the tennis courts in summer of 2020, what is our cash balance at the end of '21 and '22 with not, don't do the bus garage, just say, could we afford, without any additional taxes, to do the tennis courts next summer?
Yeah, if you look at the end of 20 even, there's the 687 there.
Right.
So the bus garage doesn't even affect that at all if we did it in 20.
Well, and this doesn't have any of the remaining bond proceeds in it.
It does.
It does.
It does. So that beginning balance there of the 815, that includes that.
Okay.
That is.
Plus the 300 that we haven't spent.
That is, yeah, that's the 500 of the bond, and then it's the 300 something PI. Yeah, so this is very simplified. This is just how much money do we have. Chris and I, when we start breaking it up into 3 different funds and what you can pay out of what fund, it becomes a little bit more complicated for us, but this is very, very simplified, just to show you what you have.
That's okay, that's what we need, and we like it that way. And then, and whether it's a capital projects fund or, and that, we'll let the accountants figure all that out, how it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to item B, this is the first scenario that I was asked to prepare. This would be passing 7.9 mils in 2020, so that would be next fall if we were to pass 7.9 in the general fund.
So that's not the school year then?
No, so these, on the right-hand side there, those boxes where I can plug numbers in, that's calendar year. So whether we pass it in spring of 2020, which is definitely not gonna happen because we're not there, or we pass it in fall of 2020, calendar year, our resulting revenue is the same. So you can see there in the yellow at the top, when we're talking general fund, over to the right is where I plugged in the 7.9 mils, and then the yellow under the general fund in the middle there is where that additional revenue is showing. You can see what that does to the balance. We're not changing anything in this scenario. We're not changing anything with our transfer out. We're not changing anything with the inside millage. We're keeping that over in the PI. But you can see the difference in the ending balance is significant. Now, looking at the scenario and not doing anything in PI, that's great for the general fund, not so much for PI. You still don't have the money in there to do what you want to do. Okay, item C, then we talked about, or I was asked 7.9 in, because 7.9 is just historically what has been used. So this one's just showing general fund on B, that was just what happens to the general fund if we pass it in 20. This shows you what happens if we pass it in 21 instead of 20. And you can see the difference in the general fund there. We go from 2024, if we were to pass it in calendar 20, we would end up with $13.9 million. Fantastic. If we were to pass it in '21, which is only 1 year later, we would end up with $9.7 million at the end of '24. So that's 1 year's collection difference, yeah. Exactly. We would be looking at, if we passed it in '20, in '24, we're doing fantastic. We wouldn't need to be worried about a levy in '24 until the next fiscal year. If we don't pass it until '21, we're going to start talking about a levy in '24 again. Because we lost a whole year's worth of collection on that. We didn't lose, but it's one less year of collection.
So I just did a quick, if we pass the levy, maybe you just said the same thing, I'm sorry, I was looking at my paper here. If we pass the 7.9 mil levy next year, and we don't have any additional money for facilities, but we want to do the bus garage and the tennis courts, that levy only lasts about 2 years, from what I'm looking at.
If you were going to increase, you would have to increase your transfer from your general fund.
Right, to cover the deficit. Fit it in. So you end up, once you get down to here, that can
PI balance last 2 years.
No, your whole levy only lasts a couple of years, because you're taking the extra $2.5 million out of your levy proceeds to pay for the capital projects. And so then that levy doesn't come up for your cycle any longer. So that's not great. Did you find the answer when you were running all these scenarios, I hope?
No, that's why you guys are like,
I do have one.
I give you the scenarios and you come up with the answer.
Let's keep going.
Keep going?
It does get
Okay.
better.
All right, so.
I am curious, why did you move the bus garage money a year later in these later scenarios? Now they're in 22, 23.
Because if you look at the ending balance in '21, it's only $578,000. I wouldn't have $1 million to spend that year. Actually, we don't have it the next year either, but.
Right. Okay.
This one, these B and C were really just kind of show you the difference in the general fund, of the difference 1 year makes.
Right.
The bottom, frankly, was probably left over from another scenario.
Yeah, we can't wait till 22.
All right.
Scenario C.
So, 21 you mean? Oh, you need to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at scenario D, this was a request from a board member to run 7.4 mils in the general fund for '21, and then 1.5 as a PI levy. So that money then would be going straight into PI, and it would stay there. This also.
So it's 8.9 mils total in 2021.
Right. So now look at that though, look at your general fund at the end of '24, you only have $9 million. So you're looking at a levy again. So overall, at the end result for PI, you do have a positive balance, so you can do those projects. I wouldn't be so concerned with the negatives in '22 and '23 because we can move things around. We're talking the whole 5 years there.
But it's like a 2-year levy cycle again.
Yes, you're passing it again. It's gotta be. Next. All right, moving on to scenario E. So this was another request. This is 7.9 and 20. So you can see what that does to the general fund. It also includes a 4 mil levy then in the following year in '21 for PI. So that would be a PI levy. Again, that money is going into PI, it's staying there. Because of that then, we are reducing the transfer. So if you look at kind of the peachy colored lines, that's the transfer from the general fund to the PI. We're getting rid of that. So that does help your general fund balance then, removes it from the PI. Because you've got millage going in there now, you don't need as much of a transfer. Or you don't need to transfer from the general funds. You've got a designated revenue stream coming from taxes into your PI levy, or into your PI fund.
Actually, I don't expect you to have looked into this, but do we have examples of schools successfully going back to back?
I wouldn't know.
I have all of the data for elections.
Okay.
So-
November,
So with this 4 mills for PI, but that's in addition to the what, 1.5
That we have
inside
now.
mills.
Yes, that is not changing any inside millage.
So it sets up that we have between 2 and 3 million annually to, we know we need 2 million every year just to do regular projects. It gives us $1 million to start chunking out projects at the high school, or like every other year doing a
Gives you
$2
some money
million
to work with.
project instead of waiting for one big bond issue to do it.
Right, and then keep in mind too, you know, if you decided somewhere down the line, you didn't need the 3 million in there every single year, you can move your inside millage back to general fund.
Right.
Now, the PI millage, you can't move, once you vote that in there, that's staying there. And frankly, you know, given what we've determined needs to be done on our facilities, you need that there anyway. That's not a risk.
So the voted millage is, at full capacity, is 2.25 million. It's not a huge number. That is probably what we're going to need. And then we'd have some flexibility with those inside mills.
The voted in there is 4, that's passing 4.
Right, but the amount that we collect is 2.25 million.
Oh, million, I
Yeah.
said mills.
I'm sorry,
I was like,
million.
mills.
I know.
Okay, yes.
Very confusing. What's nice about that is it truly separates out our facility projects from our operating. There's always this tug and pull where, you know, when we have something that's more expensive than we thought, we don't want to have to cut staffing or cut programming if we have a facility emergency. But, you know, it's a commitment.
And that does, you know, put you in a better position in your general fund that stretches that levy out.
Right.
You know, doing it in 20 versus 21, we already showed earlier creates, you know, that's a $4 million swing. So you're at 17 there at the end of 24 because you've additionally given yourself another $3 million in your general fund by not
Probably getting a
transferring.
4 or 5 year levy on that
I
one.
mean, you have to be transparent though, when you're in 2020, talking to the community about the 7.9, that you're also coming back next year for 4. which
Absolutely.
Did you do it the other way around?
Together.
Right, I know.
When do we have some bills falling off?
We have bills falling off in 20.
It's about 4 mils. Did you do it the other way? where
Well,
the
she gets to,
PI was first?
she gets to G, so let's keep going.
I did not do the vice versa of that. No, I did not. But I, you know, like I said, I have.
Is that, let's just, if you don't have it on here, let's just talk about that for a minute, because if we have 4 mils falling off the tax bill, the 4 mil PI would be a no new tax. Nobody's taxes are going to go up, but we have the money we need for facilities. And then we would have to communicate, we still need an operating levy because we still need to pay our teachers. It would be coming back to next year, right, for that. I feel like that's a cleaner communication because the millage that's falling off is facility millage because it was bond millage. And so we're replacing that with a tax that now gives us the money we need to do these projects every few years.
Is that F or is that F you're talking about?
That would be E.
I don't think it's on here.
Well, it's E.
No, I didn't agree to that. I'm
But
doing it
it's
now.
4, 20,
Just
and
do
then
it, I mean,
9,
or you could, rather than say, we're coming back next year, you could just do it all the one
You
year.
said we do have
Yeah, that
4
would
falling
be
off in 2020.
12, 13 mils.
Right, but you could still, you could do it one
You could
act.
still say you're losing
You could
4.
say,
Only
we're losing
7.9
4,
and
this,
then
you know,
your
this
net
one,
effect
this
is-
one is not a fact, this
Well,
one is
and
operating.
nothing passes over 10, so we can't really do
That's
all.
that. But Mary Kay's saying, would it be enough of an offset if we said that 4 of it isn't really a new tax? So it's less
Net
than,
effect.
but I know, I think it might be harder, but it's hard. I mean, these are, doing them back to back, is that worse?
It's expensive to be on the ballot and have a levy committee and
Yeah.
do all that.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Okay, so F.
I mean, I think we should really be talking about it when we've gone through all the scenarios.
F is similar. What that does is both of them together in 21. So it's a 7.9 in the general and a 4 in the PI. Now, this is
So
calendar.
this is what you just said, I think. So
Yeah,
this is the
this
next
one
year.
would be combining
Right.
them.
Yeah.
This also then eliminates the transfer starting in '22. So that's another $1 million to your general fund.
So we'd have enough mills coming in from the PI levy that we wouldn't need the transfer anymore.
Right. Right. And then your general fund at the end of '24 is 13, so you're probably looking at a levy in the next year.
Say that again?
Your general fund balance at the end of '24 is 13 million. So you're not too far away from another levy.
So this last 3 to 4 years is basically what you're saying. So that would be great to get 11.9 mils and say it's only going to last 3 years.
Right. All right, so moving on to G, I was asked to run 2.6 mils in 20.
For PI.
The PI.
PI. 7.9 then in 22 in the general, and the way you're getting out to 22 is because you are eliminating that transfer in the general. So you're not doing anything for your general fund until 22.
So this also supports the story that some bond millage has fallen off in 2020. We've done all this work and we really understand our facility maintenance and improvement needs.
Right.
So we're asking for 2.6 to address that on an ongoing
Right.
basis, which actually...
Would this would not allow you to do your bus garage. You don't have enough money there. But I think part of this, the idea of this scenario was then funding the bus garage through a small bond. I did make some calls. The idea of a $2 million bond, I was actually laughed at. It was why would you want to do that? You don't do that. You do that in COPS. So interest rates that I'm hearing right now for us on a small $2 million COPS issue, like 2.5%.
Certificates of participation, not.
Sorry, yes, it's a form of, yes.
But
But
it's $2 million bond or
A $2 million.
Oh, so just to do the bond for the bus
It would be
garage?
COPS, it wouldn't be a bond. It'd be a.
But actually, we could increase the 2.6 to 4 for the PI, right? We don't have a scenario here that runs it, but you could do 4 mils PI in 2020, and then 7.9 in operating in 2022, and now you can pay for the bus garage, and in 24 with operating, you have 10 million in cash.
It's still maybe a 3-year levy.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, we have $18 million worth of facility needs that have to be taken care of.
I know. So let's just to recap the bond. So there's kind of a threshold at which it doesn't make sense to do a bond. What is the number below which it doesn't make sense?
So that I wasn't able to really kind of get a good idea out of anybody, because I did forward just exactly word for word what you sent me. And it was, look, if you're trying to get $2 million in COPS, we don't do that. So, and at 2.5% for 15 years.
Is that what the cops are running at?
That's what I was quoted.
Did you get a bond rate like a current?
He didn't run it.
The thing
Well, we might do bigger bond.
Well, the thing I don't like about that, though, is one of the compelling reasons for doing a PI is you're also able to communicate to the community, this is in perpetuity. So
Right.
we've identified this problem, and this is the solution.
Right.
Once you start talking about a certificate of participation, you're taking the future revenue, using it now. You may find yourself in 5 to 7 years with a need that you didn't even project, and now you're back to the community of, we need facility money again. So I truly prefer that as a last case emergency scenario, not something we build into our plan.
But we could put the bus garage in scenario G because you have cash balance available for projects in the range of $3 million, but you haven't spent it. So I'm not sure why the bus garage couldn't.
What are you looking at?
At G?
G and saying you could
Cash?
with the 2 million.
No, without it, with doing 2 points, if you switch it to 4 mils, yes. But doing it at 2.6 mils, you're down to $586,000 at the end of 2024, and that's without spending.
G with a 4 mil. Because then it's, in 2020, you come out with a no new tax.
No additional.
No additional money or whatever you say, I don't know.
He's right, no new taxes, right?
Well, it's a new
It's a new tax.
It's no additional
No additional money.
cost.
And then you can wait to 2022 for your operation then? And
Yeah,
you can
but
still do
it-
projects?
Yeah, 22, but in 24, you're back to 10 million, which is.
Yeah, we did that, so it's only a 2-year levy.
Because you need your, at least 2 months carryover, which that
Where you get
3.5
close to.
million is getting, you can't go the next year, you do well.
Yeah, our cash policy is running right around 6 million.
I mean, one thing I want to point out is, we're talking about doing a bus garage, which is like a 40-year asset. Let's call it a 40-year asset. If it doesn't have, now, I mean, the current one is probably like 40 years old, right? And we're talking about funding a 40-year asset out of like operating funds. Especially if you can get like 15-year money for 2%, 2.5%, anything less than 4%, that's great. So I mean, I'm just saying, it's like, you always want to like kind of stack the debt
The percentage, yeah.
closer to the life of the asset, and we're looking at like doing a bus garage on operating funds. I mean, cops, I mean, that's 15 years on a 40-year asset. That's a very sound financial move, and it doesn't stress our operating budget.
Right now, that COPS rate is actually lower than bonds that people have gone out for, which is interesting. And I think it's just because it's only 15 years versus, 37 years.
I do worry that the $2 million number is lower than what we're really gonna want.
For the bus garage?
For the bus garage? I don't know
Well,
how vetted that number is
Yeah.
yet.
Well, one of the next things, if we decide that tennis courts and bus garage are happening in the next couple of years, I think then we enter into a contract with TDA, and they'll have an iterative process to get some answers to the risk factors, like the soils and the actual design costs. They'll get some better quotes for us, and then we'll have a better sense of what those numbers are. So we're using our best guess right now. And I do think Ryan has said that that's a pretty solid number.
We feel very good about that number.
Yeah.
He also feels good about the conversations I've had with him, us saying, here's the budget.
Yeah.
Tell us like what you
Yeah,
really
do it
think
for
we should
this
consider
amount.
as an add-on, but here's what we have to spend.
Okay.
The COP has to be on a PI levy though, right? So we have to pass a PI levy and let the voters know we're going to get some of that money up front to do a bigger project.
I don't believe it's past like millage. I think it's,
No, the COP the board approves, but it has to be on a PI stream.
yeah, you have to have money in your,
We have to pass a PI levy and message out that we're going to take some of that money soon.
I don't think you would have to pass.
In our
Can you
current
say
scenario,
inside
we
knowledge?
can transfer general fund money into PI and pay at cops.
No. Because it's
I
off of your
think
revenue
because you already
stream.
have your inside millage in there, I think you're okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, so that's
years
the question.
ago,
We do a COP on inside mills. I think we
You
might be
think we
right.
can?
I mean, years ago, we did
I believe so, I don't think that the law sees it any different.
that House Bill 264 project.
Mhm.
And that was similar to a COPS in a way. I mean, that was just for action.
Yeah, I'm not knowledgeable on those.
Okay.
Actually, how much money do we get doing a COP on the inside millage that we already have?
How much what?
How much money, if we decided next week to do a COP on the 1.5 inside mills that we put in PI, how much money does that generate? Roughly.
How much, like what's the maximum that we could get?
Yeah, like what can we
That I
borrow
don't
off of
know.
1.5 mils for 15
That I
years?
don't know, because I asked for rates on on borrowing 2 million. Yeah, they could get, I mean, I'm sure that's an easy question for the professionals.
So I want to say 4 million on a
Okay. And then that's it. That's our 15 years worth of our 1.5 is spent.
It's used.
Does anybody here have $2 or $3 million?
Just lying around.
Not a 2%.
So then, moving on then to H. This is doing it sooner rather than later. This is doing it in 20. This is doing a combined 5.9 in the general, 2 in the PI. This is not changing anything in regards to the inside millage or the transfer. So that's maintaining your inside millage in your PI
it's also continuing to transfer the $1 million out of your general fund each year.
If you did this, could you make the argument this is really like a 3.9?
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's a 4-year levy cycle on operating.
I think you could. I mean, it's new levy, it's just getting
Well
people to
done.
understand. It's the message, you know, it's just
I
getting
like
people to
H right
understand.
now.
Let's not jump to any premature conclusions.
But yeah, you know, passing it sooner extends the life of the levy because it's, you know, an additional $4 million. It's a whole year of collection that we're getting.
I'd say it's still probably a 3-year levy, maybe 4, but it might be like.
It's 4 on here if
It's
we do it
4.
2020.
Yeah, I think you passed it in 24. That's assuming you're still making that transfer out. It does give you enough then in your PI to do, I did not include Gurney in here, but if you look at the bottom of 2024, there's $2 million in the PI. So you would still have enough to do all of those projects that you wanted to do. I think the message in all of these scenarios is the sooner the better.
Right.
So I think that's, you know, right now,
But we have,
the
we have
best.
4 mills falling off in 2020.
Yes.
So if we did a 5.9 operating and 4 mills PI, that would even have a
Even better. And that would certainly stretch it out longer because then you wouldn't need as much of a transfer out of the general fund, so your general fund is healthier.
I think that's what we're looking at, to see what, if we
I
can
mean,
guarantee.
you just really have to educate that the 4 mills is really.
Yeah, kind of a replacement. It's
Just
just
So-
spent it down here.
So move on to I then real quick if you would, because the only difference here is stopping that transfer in '23. So it's still passing 5.9 and still only 2, and I can certainly plug 4 in. The millage is the same, when we're passing it is the same, but this is then giving you another $2.2 million in your general fund, which stretches it a little bit further and helps you out in your general fund.
Yeah, so it's kind of, if we were to do a 4, it would look a little bit more like this
We
in
were
the general
doing
fund.
4, yeah, general fund would, if we were to do 4, I would stop the transfer earlier. Run that right now.
I still, 11.9 scares me, even though, you're still saying you're not going to be taxed all of that, I think.
Isn't it 9.9?
Yeah.
If we did 7.9 plus 4.
Oh, I would have 5.9.
Yeah, we were just talking about maybe we did 4, yeah.
You're talking about a
It's
case
still
scenario that.
Yeah, it's a blend, right?
5.9 plus 4
Yeah.
would get you 4 years?
It's 9 point, oh yeah, certainly would,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because you're gonna stop your transfer,
right.
so, you're right.
And I mean,
And then this, so it has the bus garage, the tennis courts are split up here.
That's only because when he's transferring the money.
Yeah, that would just be.
Okay, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. The year in which these expenditures occur on here is not the year that they need to occur. This is just, especially, like, looking at this right now, I just plugged in 4 in the PI for 20, moving your 5.9 to 20, and then, let's see, we can stop that transfer.
So, that would be 9.9 total in
Right.
2020.
Yeah.
Right.
That might work.
Then that 4 of it fall off,
And then
being
replace
taxed on
it.
5.9.
I still think we ought to look at like 2 million going into cops. Because that's going to really be so much.
Well, that's what I was
Well, we may
wondering.
not need to, I mean, we can front load this money and we have what we need for the next 4 years without doing the top and paying extra interest.
Yeah, but you have higher levy.
You would ask for less fill and you would ask for less millage and do a cop to pay for the bus garage part of the, yeah.
Right, it just doesn't feel like, I mean, financially, it's just wrong to have that lump in there, that $2 million, and you should be spreading it out. I mean, when you can spread it out at 2%,
Well, but that's not how we do any of the accounting for any of the projects, except for major $30 million renovations.
We're gonna have that a lot though. When we
Right,
start,
every
when we
project
start
we
doing
do.
the high school wings, we're gonna have a $2 to $3 million project. That the idea is to build up our PI funds so we can do those projects without
So what was
having to
it,
do a bond.
5.94 in 2020, that I come out to?
So what that does to your if you stop your transfer in '22, at the end of '24 in the general fund, you have 13.4 million.
So you're still going strong, right?
Yeah, you're looking at 11 in the following year. And then
So it's a four-year cycle.
your PI then doing all of those projects, you have 1.6 if you did bus garage, tennis courts, and the Gurney STEM.
You're going off of age?
I am looking at,
H if you added.
sort of, I'm looking at I,
H if you did 4 here.
Okay.
sort of, it's more like I, because we're stopping the transfer, I'm stopping it even a year earlier.
That's what I was wondering.
What's the difference between H and I?
H and I is just the transfer,
The transfer out from operating to PI.
the peach colored lines.
But we need it. The Gurney renovation's gonna be expensive.
I mean, and we,
14 is the biggest number we've seen.
That's in today's dollars though. In $26, it's more than $20.
So you could run a scenario of 5.9, basically
But the problem is doing
H
this
or
a
I,
lot.
5.9 in operating, 4 in PI,
Yes.
and then we could price out, we could give you ranges of what you could chunk off of that in PI and cops.
Right.
Make the decision if you want to do the bus garage.
That's why I asked.
Understand that some of that-
Without doing it, or financing a portion of it. I mean, you don't have to leverage a full mill. I mean, I would imagine that 0.25 to a mill would get you a bus garage.
And we can do it, we can talk about it, but to me, it's not how we account for any of our, I mean, now we're changing the way, I mean, Phil's talking about an asset.
Still.
40-year asset paying for it, yeah.
Right, which is not, then we should be really looking, I mean, why is the bus garage the only cost? I mean, the bus garage is gonna cost us about as much as chunking out the high school projects. So if we're going to take that approach, then I think we need to take it consistently across all our projects, which I don't know that is even possible.
What I'm saying is if you go with 5.9 and 4, H or I, you put yourself in a position to do either one of those options. Either fund it as we have articulated and believe in, or talk about, really look at costs.
I agree.
I mean, either way, it's the same amount.
I mean, you gotta look at, you know, okay, the pavement in Gurney by the bus garage is falling apart. So that's to me the thing that says, oh, we gotta do that sooner, because or else we gotta do the pavement, so we gotta do pavement and then rip it up in 2 years to do the garage, so that's one of those things why you wanna do it, so that might make sense why you would do a COPS.
Do it sooner.
Do it sooner.
Yeah.
That what do you say to deferred payment and all that?
Yeah.
Well, if we're doing it all in 2020, then
I know, I mean, that's why sometimes you gotta, sometimes, you know, you do defer, like, okay, I'm not gonna do that because I know in 2 years, whatever, if I did that, it's gonna make a mess. Or there are other things you do it earlier if you can, because we gotta, you know, put too much in just to bring it up to code or whatever.
And that's, I think, to the point of prioritizing the projects. We've seen in the realm of $200,000 to $250,000 at the bus garage that we're going to have to spend if we don't replace it soon. And then, as Sharon was pointing out, the STEM wing at Gurney, we don't want to put $100,000 or more into the modular unit if we could not spend that money and do that piece sooner. So it'd be great if we could do all of these next summer. Chris, can you like line those up?
And they all are estimates. I mean, you know, in your home, you think, oh, I got, you know, 10 years on my roof, and maybe you got to do it in 8, or maybe you can go 15.
Right.
I mean, you kind of put it in here, but you can't, you know.
And none of them are nice to have.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
Right.
These are all.
Yeah, roofs and pavement are so nice to have, yeah.
They're wants, not needs.
Yeah.
Well, I think we made a lot of progress. We probably need to massage this just a little bit more in anticipation of the next meeting. I don't think it affects our approval of the 5-year forecast, but having a sense of the levy, I think we've, you know, let me summarize and you guys chime in if you think you want to add anything. But it looks like 2021 is about as far as we can go. There's some real advantages to going out in 20 because we have the 4 mills to drop off and we can message about that to our community. We'd like to see a revenue stream for facility projects that's independent of our operating. And I think we just need to kind of massage that with what we think will be palatable and how we would message it, and then whether we do a little bit of a cup to front load some of the money, we can massage that piece of it as well when we have a little more information about what that is.
Well, also, I think
is that
in terms
accurate?
of the people, yes, and in terms of the people that hung around, tennis court information. The tennis court is on in 2020 in every scenario that we looked at. So that is currently incorporated into all our thinking.
And I would also like to just remind, everybody that the last levy was in 17, was planned for 3 years, and it was, 3 something mils bond, 3.4. And yes, and so our operating was not our normal 7.9. So we said 3 years, 2020 is 3 years. So that's, and so we're kind of need to play catch up on our operating, which is why we, yes, we usually waited 4 years, sometimes 5, but it was a small operating levy.
I think that gives us enough to narrow it down to maybe 2 sheets of paper next time, 2 or 3 maybe.
Those were requests.
And no, I'm thrilled. It's good to see it, and we can all digest it and kind of get back with Ashley. And I know we have some additional questions that came up tonight about interest rates and things like that. I do want to talk a little bit about this idea of a capital projects fund. So I'll summarize.
Before we move off of that,
Yeah.
If 2020 means the summer, the board is going to have to take action on the first phase of design and soil borings and initial work at the next meeting of tennis courts. So
I would like to see bus garage and tennis courts potentially on the next agenda because we need information about both of those projects.
okay, so you've seen what I have in terms of tennis courts in terms of the initial phase. Whatever additional information you need or want regarding tennis courts, please let me know. And as well as bus garage, we have pre-designed bids for that, testing, environmental, all of those bids.
Well, you're just bringing the recommendation to do the next layer of work, right?
To engage TDA to start the design services.
TDA design services. I wasn't going to do that for the bus garage unless you see that as pressing. We haven't had any conversation where that comes in 2020.
Right. Would it help us, though, to have better figures around it?
At one point, you saw a proposal on kind of what that pre-design work, environmental work. We have that. We can share it in a board report on
And I
Friday
think he
again.
needs 9 months or so to do that work for the bus garage.
Yes. We're up against it in tennis courts if we want to be playing. Like
For
in
next
approval
summer.
in December.
We can be playing next fall.
If you want to, yeah.
And we can confirm
The
that.
bus garage,
I'm
you're
just
right.
wondering if we're going out for a levy in 2020, we need to have a pretty good idea about what the bus garage is going to be by the time we go out for a levy, which would mean having them do a lot of that work now to solidify the plan. The voters are going to want to know what we're doing with this money.
I'm
So
not
that's the
sure
reason
a
I'm
month
thinking.
makes a difference in terms of getting that information for setting millage and things of that nature. A month right now would impact tennis courts in terms of your ability to play.
And I disagree, Catherine, because the 4 mills is the whole 1 to 10 year, it's not just the bus garage project. So basically 4 mills is, we did all this work and here are our needs over the next 10 years and we need to start funding it. I don't know that whether it's 2, 1.8, 2.2 for the bus garage matter.
I think it's really important that I put some comments to the original contract. To the degree that we know what phase 1 exactly entails and can see that it's iterative. So obviously if we find out with soil bearings that, I forget, that's soil testing, if there's a problem over there, we may need to regroup and readdress. So to the degree it spells that out, I think it's really helpful, and just to reemphasize that it's an iterative process. We're not going to go into the complete design phase. We're going to treat it very thoughtfully, and I know that's how you approach it, but to the degree it's spelled out in the contract, I think that's helpful. And then I think we're probably ready at December meeting to look at the plans and what's a little bit more detail on what's involved and some of the pros and cons. One of the questions I had from the diagram tonight after hearing the feedback from the parents was spectators, like where exactly would they be? Is there a disadvantage to this new configuration? Is it going to be hard to watch the tennis matches, or are there benches and stuff incorporated so people can watch the players? Because that seems to be really important. So
Yeah, I just
little things like
I
that.
don't think that level of design happens as
Right.
part of the process. So
Right.
maybe we could give some input into those things that we would like to see now to get them going in that direction. But the pros and cons and locations, Ryan has that information he can share.
Yeah, I think it's worth us having him here if he can be here and digging in a little bit deeper into what exactly is going to happen with the tennis courts.
I just want to, I'd like a verification of when we need to approve tennis courts. Have them ready next fall. Like, when do we actually have to make decisions?
We have to approve the design work up through design in December.
Next.
If we go into January, we're going to be
Do we know what the next approval that needs to be?
Well, Chris, help me here. I would assume he would design. He's got to prepare bids. Preparing bids would probably be early January. It's got to go out to bid for so many days. We're probably taking board action in February or March to contract with the person so they can start breaking ground as soon as.
We're taking board action before we get a vote on the non-passes.
Right.
The first thing that would
At least
happen
to
would
start
be
the
with,
design services.
yeah, the first thing that would happen is we purchase a contract from the architect to enter into a design services that also includes the pre-construction aspects, which would be a land survey, soil boring, and they would analyze that information. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get that information analyzed and back in a report, and then you build the design after that, once you get that information in.
So you want clarity, just so we're on the same page, you want clarity and basically an exit strategy if we come back and all of these borings are bad and location is bad, or it has retaining wall that adds $1 million to the project. You want to be able to say that's not
like,
going to work.
well, let's take a new approach.
Yeah.
Like,
We'll make
let's
sure
look
that's
at a
clear.
different
And we know we would do that anyway,
Yeah,
and I know that's how they would approach it as well, but I'd love to see that very much clarified.
The other thing I'd like to see is, let's decide a date where we reasonably want the tennis courts built by, and ask Brian to back up what the board approvals are from there, so we have an idea of what we're
We
looking
can
at.
tell, he has told us we're pushing time.
Yeah, so we could have a timeline by the next
Yeah.
meeting. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to run some more scenarios. We'll give Ashley some input. We have a game plan for looking at tennis courts, contract and design at the next meeting.
So the tennis courts in time for women's tennis in the fall.
Right, they'd be completed in the summer. I don't think they take longer than that to build. I mean, I think we're dealing with the timeline that TDA tells us, but our goal would be to construct them next summer. Obviously, I can't predict that we can get that completed, but we can try.
There's a lot of factors playing, as we know, with the construction project.
I just want to
Okay, so-
reiterate and thank the administration for the amount of information that came together at tonight's meeting and how well informed the board was able to be to really think through what the next year, 5 years, and 10 years look like financially. Is just, I cannot thank you enough for this.
So I just have 2 more things, sorry. You're ready to close out. One
That's
is,
typical.
I know we have some thoughts about support organization help with the Gurney STEM wing, but I think in worst case scenario, we should throw that in year 5. And I did have some questions. Chris, in your budget, you do have some work on the modular happening in fiscal year 20. I don't know if you're amending that based on us approving this plan that within the 5 years we would be doing the STEM wing, but I'd be interested to see if that is now that project's pulled out. And I think there was some, what was the other one? There's another thing in there as well. Hang on a second. think I put it in my notes.
If you're asking me about that, I would probably simply scale back that in order to get to the date that we need to, some exterior work, maybe some tune-up on the roof, but instead of instead of a $120,000 project, it might be a $15,000 project in order for us to get to that date, making an assumption that we would build it then, I guess.
Sorry.
But you're right, that is in the fiscal year
So
2020.
you'd probably pull that out, and we could put that toward the tennis court project, which is another, I would think it was 100,000, in the realm of 100,000. And then you had refurbishing the gurney modular unit as well. You had some money in there for that. Let's see, is that what we just talked about?
Yeah.
So you're saying if we're approving these things to pull it out, pull that money out of what's in them?
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm assuming we would spend that 100,000 if we're gonna do
Is
this.
there anything in 20 that you're worried about, like this summer's projects?
Right, the list for the 2020 projects includes the modular work, and there was something else, I'm sorry, I'm looking for my note. I'll let you know later. I know there was another project in there that I thought we could probably pull out if the board is approving this 5-year plan of capital projects. So I'll send you an email when I find my note on that, sorry. And then, so finally, just a quick conversation about the capital projects fund, because that would be actually setting up a new fund, and we might want to do that at the December meeting. What is that? So that is a separate fund. It's similar to a PI fund, except that it's a two-way street. So all the money we take out of operating, out of the general fund that we put toward facilities, right now, when we move the money, it's permanent. We can't take it back in, and let's say we fail a levy, we can't pull that money back in and pay for teachers. But if we set up a capital projects fund, you can rescind that money back into the general fund. So we can make the transfers, start building up a balance to pay for these capital projects. But then if we needed to, we would be able to pull or if the project changed, and the project wasn't $2 million anymore, we could pull the funds back into the.
In most of these scenarios that we're looking at, though, we're stopping that transfer to the PI fund anyway. So, I mean, it's about 5 minutes worth of work for me to do it. It's not an issue. It's just.
Does that create another account he has to?
Yeah, it creates one more thing for Chris to deal with. And the other thing is that it's similar to a PI, but it can't be used for all. PI is more, we can use it for more things. This capital projects would be for capital projects. This would be for the things like the tennis courts and a building or a major renovation. Chris can use PI for some other kind of more maintenance items that still extend the life of an asset.
And computers and
right. So that's just something
there
that
are
we
some
need to keep in mind.
disadvantages.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have to decide right away. Why don't we figure out what we're doing? If we're going to continue transfers, though, I'd like to have a conversation about the pros and cons of opening up that fund, because I think it might give some flexibility that the board would appreciate having in times of,
Right, but that might be something for down the road. I mean, the first couple of years, no, we're not gonna have overruns of money in it. It's when it's starting to
build up.
When we're all, long gone and old and not playing tennis anymore,
I'm sorry, what was your question, Brad?
Is that money, if you do a capital plan, is that money considered out of the operating budget at that point?
If you move it out of for those transfers right now that we're transferring out of the general fund into PI, we could make those transfers into a capital projects.
Okay.
Instead of a PI. That's, that's an.
So you can move the money back from capital, but then you
Right.
can't use it for
Approving something in the 5-year forecast, you've approved the theory of that. You still haven't approved the actual transfer. I still have to bring the transfer to you for approval.
Right.
So
Is it thought that this is a bucket for sinking funds, so when we build up an
Essentially,
we move it over there and let it.
Right, so Ashley explained with the 5-year forecast, you're not as locked into a particular year, that project happening, but for that to happen, you have to front load maybe some of the transfers. And I think the board might feel more comfortable if we're making a bigger transfer in advance of a project, if we knew we could pull it back if we needed to.
Yeah, that's assuming, if you don't pass PI millage, or passing operating millage instead of PI millage, and you're pulling it from your general fund into there, you can transfer it back.
It's really
If you're
short.
gonna pass PI millage, and you're not really transferring into there anymore, then it's not.
Right, no, that
not
is-
quite
it certainly
necessary.
assumes that
It's
we're
for the next
maintaining
couple
some
of years.
transfer, and then, if we wanted to front load that transfer and do like a $5 million transfer. So the other thing is economies. If Chris finds he can do all the paving at all of the campuses, and we can save $1 million, but we have to spend a lot more than $2 million that year, it gives us some flexibility to make that decision to save that money without the risk of it, it's permanently transferred.
But if you don't have a transfer, if we move to a point where we make the decision, we're going to get the PI from the inside mills or PI, it's not.
It's
doesn't
irrelevant.
make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
So
But I don't know if we're gonna
To
get
put that in place
there.
now, we don't want to wait and see what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I just said. I think I want to introduce the concept, I think we should explore it. If we maintain a transfer out of the general fund, then I think we should look at this as a possibility. So maybe it's in a couple months. Or maybe after if the levy passes, then we talk about that. Okay, moving on.
Ashley's concluded.
Sorry, Ashley, does that conclude your report?
That's my report.
Whew. Back down here. Yes, I think I'm in the wrong place, sorry.
Motion for consent agenda items.
So are we on consent?
Nine.
Can I have a motion for consent agenda items 9A and 9B?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Moved by Mrs. Bro, seconded by Mr. Rankin. Any discussion? Mrs. Bruno, will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes?
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes. Can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendation 10A?
I'm going to modify that recommendation just to say it's recommended to approve the facility improvement plan with adjustments as needed per the Gurney modular.
Oh, right,
Just
because you're
wanna-
going to pull
I
out.
just want to publicly acknowledge we may be pulling some of those things out.
Okay. Not to exceed the capital
There
budget
you go.
described for 2020 and the project list there. And those are constantly looked at,
Right,
you
this is a
know.
plan, this is not,
Exactly.
it's a guideline.
Exactly.
This is not the exam.
Okay.
So we need to vote on it.
You're going to separate these or you're going to go A through D?
Chris, I found my note. So we had design costs in there for the transportation garage as well in the fiscal year 2020.
Yes.
So that's why I was thinking we were doing it soon. Okay, sorry. Any other discussion?
We're going to go A through D?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to do A. I want to do them separately, just in case. And plus there's, E needs to be separated out anyway. Okay. Any other discussion on the fifth?
No.
Okay. Mrs. Bruder, would you take the roll?
Did I get a motion and a second on that?
No.
I thought we did.
No motion or second. Bob clarified what the recommendation was.
Oh,
So I will,
you
I
interrupted that.
move to
All right,
accept 10A.
sorry. Motion by Mrs. Bro, seconded by Mr. Rankin. We finished our discussion. You can now take the roll.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes. Can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendation 10B?
So moved.
Second, moved by Mrs. Bro, seconded by Mr. Rankin.
Could
Any-
we, I would like to just modify it slightly, just to say, instead of tennis court in year 1 to 5, just make that year 1. I think that will give people a lot of comfort. And that is what we discussed, that is what we're talking about.
What we committed, it's what we discussed, so.
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
I need Robert's rules.
Any other
There's a
discussion?
motion to change the.
Second the motion.
All right, so there's an amendment to the master plan to indicate tennis courts recommended in, well, you know what?
2020.
I hesitate to do that because we're changing the recommendation of the master planning committee. I think we could ask in the previous one for Chris to put the tennis courts into the fiscal year 20 projects.
That's fine too, because the master, anyway.
Well, I would like it in the discussion. It is our
Yes.
understanding that the tennis courts are in year 1.
Right, in 2020.
All right. Any other discussion? Mrs. Bruno? Sorry.
I hear you, I'm sorry, I'm just taking notes.
That's okay, I know it's hard to
She
do
wants another
both.
discussion.
We'll just do it ourselves, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, can I have a motion
Thank
for
you.
superintendent's recommendation? What is this again?
C.
10C.
So moved.
And a second? Any discussion on this? No. Mr. Hunt, do you have any comments? Okay. Mrs. Bruno?
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mrs. Reagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oshel?
Yes.
Can I have a recommendation for superintendent's recommendation 10D? I mean, a motion for 10D?
So moved.
And a second? Let's see, moved by Mr. Kanziger, seconded by Mrs. O'Toole. Any discussion? Mrs. Bruno?
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Reagan? Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oshel?
Yes.
Can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendation 10E?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Moved by Mrs. O'Toole, seconded by Mr. Rankin. Mrs. Bruno?
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes?
Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Abstain.
Mrs. Oshel?
Yes.
Can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendation 11A? Want me to do all of them?
Yeah.
11A through C?
D.
D, sorry. I thought, did you guys want to do the 5-year forecast all together or do it separately?
I think you can all
Okay.
do together.
A through D.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Rankin, seconded by Mrs. Brose. Any further discussion? Mrs. Bruno, do you have anything to add?
Well, I kind of feel like I've used up my time, but I'm more than happy to go through October's reports if you
Were
would
there
like
any
me
questions about the October financials? Okay, I think we can skip that tonight.
to. And then the then and nows, most of those are, I'm sorry, I have coughed up in my mouth, just keep coughing. Most of those are similar to the situations from the last meeting. These are educational service center items that we received the invoice. One department was doing this before, the new department did not know that those all had to be done, so those kind of slipped through the cracks. The PSI one is for St. John's, that is for their auxiliary money. That is their money, we do their purchase orders for those items, they just didn't put the requisition in. This is one, they have somebody new over there as well. The last one is an item that is a renewal of a service, and it's automatically renewed, I believe, and the purchase order just didn't get done in time. So those are those. Equipment disposals, those are listed. I think those are self-explanatory. And
Ashley, what's
then
the threshold on when something needs to be captured in an equipment?
for then and now. So anything that where the obligation occurred before the purchase order is a then and now. I have to bring anything over $3,000 to the board.
Okay.
Under 3,000, I just take care of those in my department. I don't have to bring this here, but the law does state that over 3,000, it does have to be brought. Your forecast, I think we have covered.
Any other discussion or questions? Okay, Mrs. Bruno?
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oshel?
Yes.
Does anyone have any other business they'd like to introduce? Okay, our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, December 11th at 6 o'clock in the intermediate school cafeteria. And as you know, we will be talking some more about the tennis courts design and contract for that design work. We don't have any executive session this evening, so can I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Bro, seconded by Mr. Kanziger. Mrs. Bruno?
Mrs. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oshel?
Yes.
Thank you again for those of you that came and stayed and
Thank you.
had so much community input.